The Maybe List. By Aressa. Chapter 1, The Perfect Plan. The moving van disappeared around the corner of Peachtree Street just as Yvette Hamilton pulled her phone from her back pocket to check item number 4 on her college move-in day list. Unpack priority items first: planner, laptop, organizational supplies. Check. She stood in the parking lot of Maple Residence Hall, watching other families hauling mini fridges and string lights toward the building entrance, and felt her shoulders tense. Everyone else looked like they were attending a festival. She felt like she was reporting for an assignment she'd studied for but still might fail. "Breathe, sweetie," her mom said, appearing at Yvette's elbow with a box labeled Yvette's room, bedding and comfort items, in Yvette's precise handwriting. "You've got this so organized, it's going to be smooth as silk." Yvette managed a smile, though her hazel eyes betrayed the anxiety churning beneath her composed exterior. She'd been organizing this transition since she received her acceptance letter in March. Color-coded spreadsheets. Detailed timelines. A comprehensive things to figure out freshman year document that currently lived in a dedicated folder in her planner. "I know, Mom. It's just..." She gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. Students hugging tearful goodbyes, parents arguing about the best way to carry a futon up 3 flights of stairs, someone's music playing from a window above. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing. "And you don't think you do?" Linda Hamilton raised an eyebrow. "You've already declared your major, researched every club you might want to join, and color-coded your class schedule by difficulty level. If that's not knowing what you're doing, I don't know what is." That was the problem, though. Yvette did know what she was doing, at least the practical parts. She had her academic path mapped out: psychology major with a minor in statistics, preparing for graduate school. She'd researched every professor, read Rate My Professor reviews, and even emailed 2 upperclassmen about course recommendations. Her dorm room supplies had been purchased according to a carefully curated Pinterest board she'd been building since July. What she didn't have figured out, what kept her awake some nights, staring at her ceiling while mentally revising and re-revising her lists, were the messier parts of college life. The parts you couldn't research your way through. They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in comfortable silence, Yvette mentally rehearsing conversation starters for meeting her roommates. She'd found their Instagram accounts months ago, standard research procedure, and felt reasonably confident about compatibility. Alain Gisbert seemed creative and outgoing, lots of photos with friends, varied interests. Sam Okafor appeared studious and thoughtful, bookshelves in the background of their photos, intelligent captions. Both seemed like the type of people who had their lives figured out, which was exactly what Yvette needed. Roommates who could model successful college navigation. Room 317 had a door decorated with 3 dry erase name tags in different handwriting. Alain Gisbert, Sam Okafor, and a blank one waiting for her. Yvette touched the blank space, feeling a familiar flutter of anxiety about taking up space she hadn't earned yet. "You ready?" Linda asked, boxes balanced in her arms. Yvette pulled her planner from her purse, a daily ritual that centered her, and flipped to today's page. The college move-in day list was mostly checked off, but items 7 through 12 still needed attention: meet roommates, set up personal organization systems, establish study space, review first week schedule, begin social integration process, and complete first day reflection journal entry. "Ready," she said, knocking on the door with more confidence than she felt. The door swung open to reveal a guy with warm golden brown skin and curly dark hair that looked like it had been styled without a care in the world. He was wearing a soft gray t-shirt and jeans with paint splatters on one knee, and his smile was the kind that made you want to smile back automatically. "You must be Yvette." His voice carried just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'm Alain." Come in, Sam and I were just arguing about the optimal way to arrange furniture. We could use a tiebreaker." Yvette stepped into what would be her home for the next 9 months, immediately cataloging details. 3 beds, 3 desks, 2 windows with decent natural light, more space than the virtual tour had suggested. Alain had already claimed the middle section and had somehow made it look lived in and cozy with just a few personal touches: a small plant, some art prints leaning against the wall, a guitar in the corner. Sam's the tall one over there, contemplating whether the desk placement affects our collective feng shui, Alan continued, gesturing toward the far side of the room where a person with dark skin and natural hair and neat twist-outs stood with their arms crossed, studying the room layout with serious concentration. It's not feng shui, it's basic ergonomics and traffic flow optimization, Sam called without turning around. Their voice had a precision to it that Yvette recognized, the tone of someone who thought carefully before speaking. If we put Yvette's desk by the window and shift mine to the corner, we maximize natural light distribution and minimize disruption patterns. Yvette felt something in her chest ease slightly. These were her people, or at least, Sam might be someone who thought about optimization and traffic patterns. Where do you think I should set up? Yvette asked, setting down her boxes and pulling out her planner to make notes. I have some specific organizational needs, but I'm flexible on the details. Sam finally turned around, revealing striking cheekbones and an expression that suggested they'd been hoping for exactly this kind of practical question. What kind of organizational needs? I'm a psych major, so I spend a lot of time with research papers and need good lighting for reading. If you're a visual learner or need multiple work surfaces, the window area might be perfect. Psychology major here too, actually. With a statistics minor. Yvette felt herself straightening with pride. This was comfortable territory, academic planning, shared interests, logical decision-making. I do a lot of detailed planning and list-making, so good lighting would be helpful. And I brought some storage solutions that might work for all of us, if you're interested. Oh, we're definitely interested, Alan said, settling cross-legged on his bed. Sam's been trying to figure out where to put their collection of approximately 400 psychology textbooks, and I have art supplies that tend to explode everywhere if they're not contained properly. What kind of storage solutions are we talking? For the next hour, Yvette fell into her element. She had researched dorm organization extensively and came prepared with over-the-door shoe organizers that could hold supplies, underbed storage boxes with labels, and a variety of baskets and containers. More importantly, she had plans. Detailed plans with measurements and efficiency calculations. Linda helped set up Yvette's desk area while she directed the room optimization project with the enthusiasm of someone who had found her tribe. Sam contributed engineering-level precision to the planning, suggesting improvements that Yvette hadn't considered. Alan provided creative input and kept them all laughing when the project got too serious. I think this might be the most organized dorm room in the building, Linda said, stepping back to survey their work. 3 distinct personal spaces that somehow flowed together, everything labeled and accessible, natural light maximized. I'm actually a little jealous. It's beautiful, Sam agreed, running their hand along their newly organized bookshelf. Yvette, this is incredible. You're like a professional organizer. The praise sent a warm glow through Yvette's chest, but it was quickly followed by a familiar anxiety. Being good at organization was wonderful, but it was just the surface level. The real test would be everything else, the social aspects, the identity questions, the parts of college life that couldn't be optimized with the right storage solutions. I love how your brain works, Alan said, flopping onto his now perfectly made bed. You look at chaos and see systems. That's a gift. It's just. I like things to make sense, Yvette said, settling into her desk chair and automatically opening her planner to review the afternoon's tasks. I guess I feel more confident when I understand how things work and what's expected. Makes total sense, Sam nodded. Though college is interesting because some things are structured and predictable, and others are. They gestured vaguely. More exploratory. Yvette's pen paused over her planner. What do you mean? Well, like, your academic path is pretty clear, right? You take required courses, you study, you get grades, you move forward. But then there are things like figuring out your friend group, or your interests outside of academics, or... Sam glanced at Alan, some kind of wordless communication passing between them. Other parts of identity that you might not have fully explored yet. Identity parts? Yvette's voice came out smaller than she intended. You know, Alan said gently, tucking his hair behind his ear. Like, I'm still figuring out exactly how I want to express myself, what kind of relationships I'm interested in, how I fit into different communities. College is great for that kind of exploration. Linda looked up from where she was folding extra bedding. That's what college is for, sweetie. Figuring out who you are. But that was exactly what scared Yvette most. She'd spent so much energy organizing the concrete aspects of college life because the abstract ones felt impossible to plan for. How do you make a checklist for figuring out your identity? How do you research your way to understanding your own feelings? Does that make sense? She found herself asking, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken. Absolutely, Sam said. And there's no timeline for any of it. Some people come to college knowing exactly who they are and what they want. Others use these 4 years to experiment and explore. Both approaches are totally valid. The exploring sounds kind of scary, though, Yvette admitted, surprised by her own honesty. I mean, what if you explore and don't find anything? What if you're just confused the whole time? Alan and Sam exchanged another glance, and Yvette had the uncomfortable feeling that she'd revealed more about herself than she intended. Well, Alan said carefully, confusion can be its own kind of answer, sometimes. It tells you that you're in a growth period, you know? Like, maybe the point isn't to stop being confused. Maybe it's to get comfortable with the confusion. Yvette felt her anxiety spike. Getting comfortable with confusion sounded like the opposite of everything that made her feel secure and competent. But surely there's some point where you figure things out, she pressed. I mean, you both seem like you have a good sense of who you are. Sam tilted their head, considering. I think I have a good sense of some things about myself. My academic interests, my values, what kind of friendships I appreciate. Other things. They shrugged. I'm still learning. And honestly, I think that's going to be true my whole life, not just in college. The fun part, Alan added with a grin, is that the more comfortable you get with not knowing everything, the more space you have to discover surprising things about yourself. Things you never would have found if you'd locked yourself into categories too early. Linda checked her watch and made a soft sound of surprise. Oh honey, I should start thinking about heading back. Your dad's making dinner, and I want to beat Atlanta traffic. The reminder of her parents' departure sent a shot of panic through Yvette's chest. She wasn't ready. She had lists and plans and organizational systems, but sitting here listening to Alan and Sam talk so casually about uncertainty and exploration, she realized how much she didn't know about the most important parts of college. Mom, wait. Can we? She looked at her planner, then at her roommates, then back at her mom. Can we just run through the first week plan one more time? I want to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Sweetie, Linda said gently, you've triple-checked everything. You have your class schedule, your textbooks, your meal plan, your emergency contacts. What more could you need? A roadmap for figuring out who I am, Yvette thought. A checklist for making friends. A step-by-step guide to understanding my own feelings. Out loud, she said, I guess. I just want to make sure I do this right. Alan sat up, leaning forward with interest. Do what right? College. This whole experience. I don't want to waste the opportunity or miss out on important things because I didn't know they were important. Babe, Alan said, and the casual endearment made something warm and anxious flutter in Yvette's stomach simultaneously, you're not going to waste anything. And you're definitely not going to miss out, because you pay attention to everything. Trust me, we can already tell. Plus, Sam added, some of the best college experiences are the ones you can't plan for. The unexpected conversations, the random events you decide to attend, the friends you make in ways you never anticipated. Yvette felt her breathing get slightly shallow. Unexpected experiences sounded wonderful in theory, but in practice, they meant situations where her careful planning wouldn't help her. Situations where she might not know what to do or say. Situations where she might reveal that she was behind everyone else in some crucial way. I should let you two get settled, Linda said, recognizing the signs of Yvette's rising anxiety. Honey, walk me down to the car. During the elevator ride, Linda kept glancing at Yvette with the concerned expression that meant she was trying to figure out how to help without interfering. You know, she said as they stepped out into the late afternoon heat, your roommates seem really lovely. And smart. I think you're going to fit in beautifully. They do seem great, Yvette agreed, though her mind was still caught on their casual mentions of identity exploration and being comfortable with confusion. Do you think it's weird that I want to have things figured out? Like, they were talking about using college to explore and experiment, but I was hoping to use college to become the person I'm supposed to be. Does that make sense? Linda stopped walking and turned to face her daughter fully. Sweetie, what if those are the same thing? What if exploring and experimenting is exactly how you become who you're supposed to be? But what if I explore and don't find anything? What if I experiment and just discover that I'm boring, or that I don't fit anywhere? The questions tumbled out before Yvette could stop them, revealing fears she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself. Oh, honey. Linda reached out to smooth Yvette's light brown hair, which had gotten slightly mussed during the move. You could never be boring. And you fit everywhere that matters, with people who appreciate thoughtfulness and kindness and the particular way your mind works. They reached the car, and Yvette felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with transitions and goodbyes. I put together a little care package for you, Linda said, opening the trunk and pulling out a shoebox covered in cheerful wrapping paper. Don't open it now, save it for when you need a reminder of home. Yvette hugged the box to her chest, feeling simultaneously grateful and terrified. What if I call you too much? What if I'm not ready for this? Then you call me as much as you need to, and we figure it out together. But Yvette, Linda waited until her daughter met her eyes. I think you're more ready than you know. You've always been good at figuring things out. Trust yourself. After her mom drove away, Yvette stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, holding the care package and watching other families go through their own goodbyes. Some students seemed eager for their parents to leave so they could start their independent lives. Others looked as reluctant as Yvette felt. At least she wasn't the only one. Back in room 317, she found Sam reading a thick psychology textbook and Alan strumming his guitar quietly. The golden hour light streaming through their perfectly positioned windows made the space feel warm and welcoming, and for a moment, Yvette allowed herself to feel proud of what they'd accomplished together. Everything okay? Sam asked, looking up from their book. Yeah, just the usual parental goodbye emotions. Yvette settled at her desk and opened her planner to the evening checklist. I thought I'd do some planning for tomorrow, maybe review the campus map one more time. Want company? Alan asked, setting down his guitar. I should probably figure out where my classes actually are. I've been operating on pure optimism and assuming I'll find them through divine intervention. Same, Sam laughed. I located the psychology building and the library, and beyond that, I'm planning to wander around looking lost until someone takes pity on me. Oh no, Yvette said, opening her laptop immediately. I have detailed campus maps with optimal walking routes between all our classes. I can share them with you. You have optimal walking routes? Alan asked with delighted amazement. Well, yes. I mapped out primary and backup routes for different weather conditions, plus alternate paths if there's construction or high foot traffic. Yvette pulled up her color-coded campus navigation document. I also researched the best places to study, eat between classes, and meet up with friends. Sam came over to look at her screen. This is incredible. You've essentially created a strategic operations manual for college life. Is that weird? Yvette asked, suddenly self-conscious. Are you kidding? This is brilliant, Alan said, moving to look over her shoulder. You've solved problems I didn't even know I was going to have. As they huddled around her laptop, reviewing maps and routes, Yvette felt some of her anxiety ease. This was something she could do well: research, planning, helping others navigate practical challenges. Maybe she couldn't plan her way to understanding her identity, but she could at least make sure she and her roommates never got lost on their way to class. So, Sam said as they settled back into their respective spaces, what are you most excited about this year? And most nervous about, if you want to share? Yvette considered the question, unconsciously straightening items on her desk while she thought. I'm excited about my classes, especially research methods in psychology. And I'm excited about the independence, getting to make my own decisions about how to spend my time. And nervous about? Alan prompted gently. I guess. I'm nervous about the social aspects. Making friends, figuring out where I fit in, understanding the unwritten rules of college social life. She paused, then added more quietly, and I'm nervous about figuring out parts of myself that I haven't figured out yet. Like what kinds of things? Sam asked with genuine curiosity. Yvette felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was exactly the kind of conversation she'd been dreading, and hoping for, in equal measure. I don't know. That's the problem. I feel like everyone else my age has already explored different aspects of their identity, and I've been so focused on academic achievement that I haven't. I don't know what I don't know, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, Alan said. And for what it's worth, I think you're giving your peers too much credit. Most 18-year-olds are making it up as they go along, even if they seem confident. Really? Really, Sam confirmed. I mean, I have some things figured out about myself, but there are huge areas where I'm still exploring. And that's normal. Healthy, even. Yvette opened her planner and found herself staring at her things to figure out freshman year list. Item number 3 was, determine romantic/sexual orientation. She'd written it in her neat handwriting months ago, as if it were a research project she could complete with sufficient effort and organization. Can I ask you guys something? She said before she could lose her nerve. Of course, they said in unison, then grinned at each other. How do you figure out things about your identity? Like, is there a process, or does it just happen naturally, or? She gestured helplessly. I keep waiting for some kind of revelation or moment of clarity, but so far it's just been confusion. Alan and Sam exchanged one of their quick glances again. Well, Alan said carefully, I think it's different for everyone. For me, it's been more about paying attention to my reactions to things, and being curious about feelings instead of trying to categorize them immediately. And giving yourself permission to not know, Sam added. Like, being okay with questions that don't have clear answers yet. But how do you make decisions if you don't have clear answers? How do you know what to try or what groups to join or? Yvette's voice was getting slightly higher, the way it did when her anxiety was building. Hey, Alan said softly. You don't have to figure everything out before you're allowed to participate in your own life. You can try things and see how they feel. You can be curious about your reactions without needing to draw permanent conclusions. And, Sam said, there are communities on campus for people who are questioning or exploring different aspects of identity. Places where not knowing is totally normal and accepted. Yvette looked up sharply. There are? Oh yeah. Support groups, social groups, academic groups. Lots of spaces specifically designed for people in questioning or exploratory phases. That sounds. Yvette paused, trying to identify the emotion she was feeling. Relief? Hope? Terror? All three? That sounds like it might be helpful. Want me to send you some information? Sam asked. No pressure, just so you have it if you're interested. Yes, please. The words came out more quickly than Yvette had intended, revealing how much she wanted this kind of support. As the evening wound down and they each settled into their respective bedtime routines, Yvette felt a cautious optimism building in her chest. Her roommates were thoughtful, kind people who seemed to understand that not everything could be figured out through planning and research. And apparently there were places on campus specifically for people like her, people who had questions without easy answers. She opened her planner to complete her daily reflection journal entry, a habit she'd maintained since junior year of high school. Day 1 of college, she wrote. Successfully completed move-in and room setup. Roommates Alan and Sam seem like genuine, thoughtful people. Feeling nervous about social/identity exploration aspects of college life, but slightly more hopeful that there might be resources and communities to help with those challenges. Tomorrow, attend first classes, continue meeting people, research campus groups Sam mentioned. She paused, pen hovering over the page. In the margin, she added, maybe it's okay not to have everything figured out yet. Maybe the figuring out part is the point. Outside her window, she could hear other students settling into their new lives, laughter from the room next door, music playing somewhere down the hall, voices drifting up from the courtyard below. For the first time since arriving, the sounds didn't make her feel like she was behind or missing out. They made her feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if she didn't yet understand what that meant. She closed her planner, turned off her desk lamp, and settled into her carefully organized new life, ready to begin the messy, uncertain, essential work of figuring out who she was supposed to become. Chapter 2, The Roommate Reality Check. Yvette woke at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of her phone alarm playing the gentle chime she'd selected specifically for its non-jarring qualities. 3 minutes earlier than necessary, which gave her time to review her day's agenda before her feet hit the floor. Her first day of classes. Item number 1 on her first day success strategy was already complete: wake up early enough for unhurried morning routine. She sat up in bed, automatically reaching for the planner on her nightstand, and froze. Alan was sitting cross-legged on his bed in nothing but boxer shorts and a paint-stained tank top, sketching in what looked like a well-worn journal. His curly hair was an absolute disaster, sticking up in 12 different directions, and he looked completely comfortable with both his state of undress and the artistic chaos scattered around his bed. "Morning, sunshine," he said without looking up from his sketch. "You're up early. I like that in a roommate, means I don't have to tiptoe around trying not to wake anyone." "You're an early riser too?" Yvette asked, trying not to stare at the casual way he inhabited his own skin. She'd never seen anyone look so unself-consciously comfortable. "Oh, I've been up for hours. Best light is right around dawn, and I had this idea I needed to get down before it disappeared." He held up his journal, revealing a detailed sketch of their window with the early morning shadows. "Plus, I'm kind of a chronic insomniac, so I figure if I'm going to be awake anyway, might as well make art." "You have insomnia?" Yvette asked, surprised by the casual way he mentioned it. Sometimes. My brain doesn't always get the memo about when it's time to sleep. But I've learned to work with it instead of fighting it." He gestured to a small collection of art supplies organized in a repurposed shoebox. "Some of my best work happens at 3 in the morning when the world is quiet and my thoughts can actually settle into something coherent." Sam emerged from the bathroom at that moment, looking significantly more put together than Alan despite it being barely 7 a.m. They were wearing neat khakis and a button-down shirt, and their hair was perfectly shaped. "Good morning," Sam said, settling at their desk with what appeared to be a cup of tea in a travel mug. "I made extra tea if anyone wants some. It's this blend my mom sends from home, ginger and hibiscus." "Tea sounds perfect," Yvette said, suddenly aware that she was still in her pajamas while both her roommates seemed to have their morning routines completely figured out. "I should probably get dressed first, though." "Why?" Alan asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "It's not like we haven't seen pajamas before. Besides, these are pretty cute." He gestured to her flannel pants, which were covered in tiny books. Very on brand for a psych major. Yvette felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been sharing this space for exactly 12 hours and already felt like she was failing some invisible test of roommate compatibility. I like to get ready for the day before I do anything else. It helps me feel prepared." "That makes total sense," Sam said, pouring tea into a second travel mug. "Everyone has their own way of transitioning into the day. I'll leave this here for whenever you're ready." As Yvette gathered her clothes and headed for the bathroom, she heard Alan say, "I love how different we all are. Like, Sam's got their whole morning routine dialed in, Yvette's got her organizational systems, and I'm over here making art in my underwear. It's like we're a psychological study in complementary personality types." "Speaking of which," Sam replied, "I've been thinking about rooming compatibility research. There's this fascinating study about how successful roommate relationships actually benefit from differences in daily rhythms and coping strategies, as long as there's mutual respect for." Their voices faded as Yvette closed the bathroom door, but the conversation left her with a warm feeling in her chest. They weren't just tolerating her need for structure, they seemed to genuinely appreciate it. 20 minutes later, she emerged from the bathroom dressed in carefully coordinated clothes with her hair neat and her planner in hand, ready to tackle her first day. Sam handed her the promised tea, and Alan had put on actual pants, though his hair still looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "So," Yvette said, settling at her desk and opening her planner to review her schedule, "what's everyone's plan for today?" "I have Intro to Statistics at 9, then Research Methods in Psychology at 11, lunch break, and Introduction to Literature at 2. "Nice schedule," Sam said. "I've got Research Methods with you, actually, plus Developmental Psychology and Social Psychology. Heavy psych day for me." "Really? You're in Research Methods too?" Yvette felt her excitement spike. "I've been looking forward to that class for months. I read 3 different textbooks over the summer to prepare." Sam grinned. "Of course you did. I love that. I only managed to get through 1 textbook, but I did spend a lot of time reading journal articles about current methodology debates." "Okay, you two are officially the nerdiest people I know, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment," Alan said, now rummaging through what appeared to be a pile of clothes that had no discernible organization system. "I've got studio art, art history, and something called creative writing for visual artists because apparently I need to torture myself with words as well as images." "That sounds incredible," Yvette said. "I've always wondered what it would be like to take creative classes. Do you just make things? Without specific requirements or guidelines?" "Pretty much, yeah. It's terrifying and amazing." Alan pulled on a shirt with several small holes near the hem. "Like, in studio art, our first assignment is literally just make something that represents how you feel about being here. No medium requirements, no size constraints, no specific techniques. Just express yourself." Yvette felt a flutter of anxiety just thinking about it. "But how do you know if you're doing it right?" "That's the beautiful part, there is no right. There's just authentic and inauthentic, you know? Like, if it feels true to who you are and what you're experiencing, then it's right." "That sounds..." Yvette paused, trying to find the right word. "Liberating. And absolutely terrifying." "Both," Alan agreed cheerfully. "Which is kind of how I feel about college in general, honestly. Like, I'm excited to be here and explore new parts of myself, but I'm also scared I'm going to discover things about myself that don't fit into neat categories." Sam looked up from their psychology textbook. "What kind of things?" "I don't know, that's the point." Alan sat on his bed and started lacing up boots that had definitely seen better days. "Like, I thought I had my identity pretty figured out in high school, you know? I knew I was attracted to people regardless of gender, I knew I liked making art, I knew I was pretty comfortable with masculine and feminine expression depending on how I felt on any given day. But being here, with all this freedom and all these new people, I keep noticing that some of my old labels don't quite fit anymore." Yvette's pen stopped moving over her planner. "What do you mean?" "Well, like, I used to call myself bi, because that felt accurate and it was a label people understood. But lately I'm feeling more fluid, I guess. Like, some days I'm more attracted to feminine people, some days more attracted to masculine people, some days it's about the person themselves regardless of gender presentation. And sometimes I'm not really attracted to anyone in particular, I'm just enjoying the aesthetic appreciation of humans in general." He shrugged, tucking his hair behind his ear. "It's not a crisis or anything, it's just... I'm learning that my experience of attraction is more complex than I originally thought." "And that's okay with you?" Yvette asked, genuinely curious. Not knowing exactly what to call it. "Yeah, it's fine. I mean, the feelings are what they are, regardless of what label I use. The label is just a communication tool, you know? If it helps me explain myself to other people, great. If it stops being useful, I can find a different one, or just describe my experience instead of using shorthand." Yvette stared at him, trying to process this casual approach to identity uncertainty. "You're not worried about, I don't know, being inconsistent? Or confusing people? Or making the wrong choice about how to identify?" Babe, I think you might be approaching identity the same way you approach class schedules, Alan said gently. Like it's something you need to get right on the first try and then stick with forever. But identity isn't like that. It's more like. He gestured vaguely, clearly searching for the right analogy. It's more like your taste in music. You might go through a country phase, then discover you love jazz, then find some weird fusion genre that speaks to your soul. That doesn't mean you were wrong about liking country, it just means you're a complex person whose tastes evolved. That's a good analogy, Sam said approvingly. Though I'd say identity is even more fluid than taste, because it's not just about preferences, it's about how you understand yourself in relation to the world around you. And that understanding can deepen and change as you have new experiences. Exactly, Alan said. Like, Sam, you've been pretty clear about being a Roas since I've known you, but even that's more nuanced than it sounds to people who don't understand the spectrum, right? Sam nodded, bookmarking their place in the textbook. Right. I identify as aromantic and asexual, but that doesn't mean I don't have deep, meaningful relationships or that I don't experience any form of attraction. It means I don't experience romantic or sexual attraction the way most people seem to. But there are different types of attraction: aesthetic, emotional, intellectual, sensual, and I definitely experience some of those. Can you explain that more? Yvette asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. I mean, if you're comfortable sharing. I've heard those terms, but I'm not sure I understand the distinctions. Sure, Sam said, settling more comfortably in their chair. So, like, I can look at someone and think they're beautiful or aesthetically pleasing without wanting to date them or sleep with them. I can feel emotionally drawn to people and want deep friendships without wanting romance. I can be attracted to someone's mind or personality without it being sexual. For me, romantic and sexual attraction just aren't part of my experience. But that doesn't mean I don't form strong bonds with people. And you figured this out how? Yvette asked. Mostly by paying attention to what I was feeling versus what I thought I should be feeling, Sam said. In high school, I kept waiting to develop crushes like my friends did. I kept trying to force romantic feelings because I thought that's what was supposed to happen. But it never felt authentic. It wasn't until I found the aromantic and asexual communities online that I realized there were other people who experienced attraction the way I did, or didn't experience it, depending on how you look at it. But weren't you worried about being wrong? Or limiting yourself by choosing those labels? Sam tilted their head, considering. I think I was more worried about forcing myself into a life that didn't fit me. Like, if I had kept trying to have romantic relationships just because that's what people expected, I would have been miserable. And I would have made my partners miserable too, because I wouldn't have been able to give them what they needed. Plus, Alan added, labels aren't prison sentences. If Sam's experience of attraction changes over time, they can choose different words to describe it. The point is to find language that helps you understand yourself and communicate with others, not to lock yourself into a category forever. Yvette sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this conversation. Both of her roommates spoke about identity with such casual confidence, as if uncertainty was just another interesting aspect of being human rather than a problem to be solved. Can I ask you guys something else? She said, flipping to a blank page in her planner and starting to take notes almost unconsciously. Of course, they said in unison, then grinned at each other. How do you know what you're feeling? Like, when you're trying to figure out if what you're experiencing is romantic attraction versus friendship versus just thinking someone is cool? She paused, then added more quietly, I feel like everyone else got some kind of manual for interpreting their own emotions, and I'm just guessing most of the time. Alan and Sam exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Yvette, Sam said gently, I think you might be surprised by how many people feel that way. Emotional literacy isn't something they teach in school, you know? Most of us are just figuring it out as we go. But you both seem so sure about yourselves. Now, maybe, Alan said. But it took me years to get comfortable with not being sure about everything. I used to make myself sick trying to categorize every feeling and put labels on every experience. It wasn't until I gave myself permission to just feel things without immediately analyzing them that I started to understand my own emotional landscape. What do you mean? Like, instead of thinking, do I have a crush on this person or do I just want to be friends with them? I started thinking, I enjoy spending time with this person and I want to get to know them better. Instead of, am I gay or bi or pan? I started thinking, I'm attracted to this specific person and I'm curious about where that might lead. Taking the pressure off having the right answer immediately gave me space to actually experience my feelings instead of just trying to label them. Yvette wrote this down, word for word. That makes sense, but it also sounds incredibly scary. Like, how do you make decisions about dating or relationships if you don't know what category your feelings fall into? Well, Sam said, you could ask yourself different questions. Like, do I want to spend more time with this person? Do I feel comfortable around them? Do I want to get to know them better? Those are more actionable than trying to figure out if what you're feeling counts as romantic attraction. And, Alan added, you can be honest with people about where you are in your process. Like, I'm interested in getting to know you better, and I'm not sure yet what form that might take. Most people appreciate honesty more than false certainty. Yvette stared at her notes, trying to imagine having that kind of conversation with someone. That sounds terrifying and also kind of refreshing. Both, Alan agreed. But here's the thing, babe, you're already doing this in other areas of your life. Like, you didn't declare your major because you were 100% certain about your career path, right? You chose psychology because you're interested in how people think and you want to learn more about it. You can approach relationships and identity the same way, with curiosity instead of certainty. Actually, that's not entirely true, Yvette admitted. I did choose psychology because I'm pretty certain I want to go to graduate school and eventually work in research or clinical practice. I have a 5-year plan. Sam laughed, not unkindly. Of course you do. But Yvette, even with your 5-year plan, there are things you don't know yet, right? Like what specific area of psychology will interest you most, or what research questions will capture your attention, or what kind of clinical population you might want to work with. Well, yes, but you're comfortable with that uncertainty because it's contained within a larger framework that makes sense to you, Sam continued. You know you're interested in psychology, so you're okay not knowing exactly which branch of psychology yet. I guess that's true. So maybe, Alan suggested, you could think about identity exploration the same way. Like, maybe you know you're interested in meaningful connections with people, but you don't have to know exactly what form those connections will take before you start exploring. Yvette felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. That, actually makes it sound less overwhelming. Good, Sam said, checking their watch. Because speaking of exploration, we should probably head to breakfast soon if we want to get to our classes on time. And I don't know about you two, but I learn better when I'm not hungry. As they gathered their things for the day, Yvette found herself looking at her roommates with new appreciation. They weren't perfect people who had all the answers, they were thoughtful people who had learned to be comfortable with questions. And somehow, that felt more hopeful than intimidating. Hey, she said as they headed for the door, thank you for being so open about all of this. I know we just met yesterday, but I already feel like I can ask you guys things I wouldn't feel comfortable asking anyone else. That's what roommates are for, Alan said, slinging his beaten-up messenger bag over his shoulder. Well, that and splitting the cost of late-night pizza orders and helping each other through finals week emotional breakdowns. Speaking of which, Sam added, we should probably establish our policy on borrowing clothes, bathroom scheduling, and overnight guests sooner rather than later. Just so we're all on the same page about boundaries and expectations. Oh, I have a roommate agreement template, Yvette said automatically, then caught herself. Sorry, that probably sounds incredibly controlling. Are you kidding? That sounds incredibly useful, Alan said. I was just going to wing it and hope we figured it out through trial and error, but having actual guidelines sounds way more practical. Plus, Sam said, setting clear boundaries usually makes it easier to be flexible when situations come up that don't fit the standard guidelines. As they walked down the hall toward the elevator, Yvette felt a cautious optimism building in her chest. Her roommates appreciated her organizational tendencies without expecting her to have everything figured out. They shared their own experiences with identity and uncertainty without making her feel like she was behind or broken. And they approached the whole messy business of figuring out who they were with curiosity and kindness instead of anxiety and shame. Maybe, she thought, college wasn't going to be about having all the right answers. Maybe it was going to be about learning to ask better questions. So, Alan said as they stepped into the elevator, "What's everyone most nervous about today? And most excited about?" "Nervous about getting lost between buildings," Sam admitted. "Excited about research methods and getting to dive into actual study design. Nervous about my creative writing class because I've never shared my writing with strangers," Alan said. "Excited about studio art and seeing what other people are making." They both looked at Yvette expectantly. "Nervous about?" She paused, considering. Yesterday she would have said she was nervous about everything: making friends, understanding social dynamics, figuring out where she fit in. Today, those fears still existed, but they felt more manageable somehow. "I guess I'm nervous about not knowing how to talk to people in my classes. I'm good at academic conversations, but I'm not sure about the social part." "And excited about?" Alan prompted. Yvette smiled, surprising herself with the genuineness of it. "Excited about learning things I don't know yet. Including things about myself." As the elevator opened onto the lobby, she realized that for the first time since arriving at college, she was more curious than scared about what the day might bring. Her roommates had shown her that uncertainty wasn't a flaw to be fixed, it was a doorway to be walked through. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start walking. Chapter 3: The Unfamiliar Territory. 3 weeks into the semester, Yvette had successfully established routines for everything measurable about college life. She knew the optimal routes between buildings, the best study spots in the library, which dining hall had the shortest lines at different times of day. Her classes were going well. She'd already impressed her research methods professor with her thorough understanding of statistical analysis, and her literature professor had praised her detailed discussion posts. What she hadn't figured out was anything related to the emotional or social aspects of identity exploration that Alan and Sam made look so effortless. She sat at her perfectly organized desk on a Thursday evening, laptop open to what she had privately labeled her identity research project. 17 browser tabs were open, displaying everything from academic articles about sexual orientation development to Tumblr posts about the difference between aesthetic and romantic attraction. Her notebook contained 3 pages of handwritten notes in 2 different colored pens, organized by topic: types of attraction, sexual orientation definitions, how to know what you're feeling. "Okay," she murmured to herself, "let's approach this systematically." Alan looked up from where he was lying on his bed, sketching in his art journal. "Approach what systematically?" Yvette felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't realized she'd spoken out loud. "Oh, just some personal research I'm doing." "What kind of personal research?" Sam asked, swiveling around in their desk chair where they'd been reading a psychology journal. "Is this for a class project?" "Not exactly." Yvette glanced at her screen, then back at her roommates. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd proven themselves to be the kind of people who could be trusted with vulnerable admissions. "I'm trying to figure out my romantic orientation. You know, like we talked about that first morning. I thought maybe if I researched it enough, I could identify patterns or find a framework that would help me understand what I'm feeling." Alan set down his pencil and gave her his full attention. "How's that going?" "Honestly, it's making me more confused than when I started." Yvette gestured at her screen. "Like, I've read 17 different definitions of bisexuality, and they all seem to describe different experiences. And then there are all these other terms: pansexual, demisexual, biromantic, gray asexual, and I can't tell if any of them fit or if I'm overthinking everything." "Can I ask what prompted this research project?" Sam said gently. Yvette minimized her browser windows, suddenly feeling exposed. "I keep noticing that I have reactions to people that I don't understand. Like, last week in my literature class, there's this girl, Maya, who sits 2 seats over from me. She has these incredible eyes and she always asks really thoughtful questions, and I find myself looking forward to hearing her voice. But I can't tell if I want to be friends with her or if I'm attracted to her or if I just admire her intellectual approach to the material. All valid possibilities, Alan said. What does it feel like when you think about her? That's the problem. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. Like, when my high school friends talked about having crushes, they described this overwhelming feeling of wanting to be around the person and thinking about them constantly. But Maya. I'm curious about her thoughts, and I notice when she's not in class, and sometimes I imagine what it would be like to study with her. Is that romantic attraction? Friendship interest? Academic admiration? Sam leaned forward with interest. And how does that compare to how you feel about other people in your classes? Well, there's this guy, Jake, in my statistics class who's really funny and smart. I enjoy talking to him about homework, and he has a great laugh. But I don't think about him when he's not there the same way I think about Maya. Yvette pulled up her notebook and flipped to a page titled Attraction Analysis. I've been trying to categorize my reactions to different people to see if I can identify patterns. Oh honey, Alan said softly. You're trying to science your way through feelings. What's wrong with that? Yvette asked defensively. Feelings are just neurochemical reactions. There should be patterns. There probably are patterns, Sam agreed. But feelings aren't just data points. They're lived experiences that happen in context, with all kinds of variables that don't fit into neat categories. Yvette looked between her roommates, feeling increasingly frustrated. But how do you make decisions without data? How do you know if you should ask someone out if you don't know what you're feeling? Have you considered, Alan said carefully, just spending time with Maya and seeing what develops naturally? Like, instead of trying to label your feelings first, maybe explore the connection and let your understanding evolve organically? But what if I misread the situation? What if I think I'm interested romantically and she just wants to be friends? Or what if I assume friendship and miss romantic potential? Both of those things happen to people all the time, Sam said. Even people who are confident about their orientation and experienced with dating still misread situations sometimes. It's part of being human. That doesn't sound very efficient. Alan laughed, not unkindly. Babe, human connection isn't supposed to be efficient. It's supposed to be meaningful. Yvette stared at her notebook, feeling defeated. I feel like everyone else learned some language for understanding their own feelings that I somehow missed. Like, you both can talk about your experiences of attraction with such clarity, and I feel like I'm fumbling around in the dark. Can I tell you something? Sam said. I've been watching you navigate social situations these past few weeks, and you're actually pretty good at reading people and responding appropriately. You ask thoughtful follow-up questions, you remember details people share about themselves, you're genuinely curious about others' perspectives. Those are all relationship skills. But I don't know if what I'm feeling counts as romantic interest or... Yvette, Alan interrupted gently, what if the label doesn't matter as much as the experience? What if instead of asking am I romantically attracted to Maya, you asked would I like to get to know Maya better outside of class? That's an actionable question that doesn't require you to have your orientation figured out first. Yvette considered this, pen hovering over her notebook. That, actually sounds less overwhelming. But also scarier, because then I'd have to do something about it. You don't have to do anything, Sam said. You could just let yourself be curious without pressure to act on it immediately. Speaking of being curious, Alan said, closing his art journal and sitting up fully, have you thought about finding other people who are in similar questioning phases? Like, maybe there are campus groups or resources for people who are exploring identity stuff? Yvette's eyes lit up. Actually, you mentioned something about that when I first moved in. You said there were communities for people who were questioning or exploring? Yeah, definitely. I haven't looked into it personally since I'm pretty comfortable with where I am right now, but I know they exist. Sam pulled out their laptop. Want me to help you research? This seems like a more productive direction than trying to categorize every feeling you have. Yes, please. That would be amazing. For the next hour, they huddled around Sam's laptop, searching the university website for support groups, social organizations, and academic resources related to LGBTQ+ identity exploration. They found several options: a general LGBTQ+ student alliance that met weekly, a support group for students questioning their gender identity, a social group for asexual and aromantic students, and something called Maybe Group, with a simple description: a supportive space for students exploring questions about sexual and romantic identity. No labels required. That one sounds perfect for you, Alan said, pointing to the Maybe Group listing. Look, it even says, no labels required. Yvette read the description several times. It meets Tuesday evenings in the campus wellness center. Next meeting is. She checked her calendar. This Tuesday. 3 days from now. Are you going to go? Sam asked. Yvette felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. I want to. But I'm also terrified. What if I don't belong there? What if everyone else is further along in their questioning process? What if I don't know how to participate in that kind of group? What if it's exactly what you've been looking for? Alan countered. What if there are other people there who feel just as confused and frustrated as you do right now? Plus, Sam added, you don't have to commit to anything by going to one meeting. You can just check it out and see if it feels like a good fit. Yvette opened her planner and found Tuesday evening's page. She had blocked out time for personal reading and reflection, a weekly appointment she'd made with herself to journal about her college experience. I could go, she said slowly. I mean, theoretically. It's at 7 p.m., and I don't have any other commitments. Do you want to go? Alan asked. Yes. And also I'm terrified. Both of those things can be true, Sam said. And being terrified doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. Sometimes it just means the something is important. Yvette picked up her pen and wrote, Maybe Group, Campus Wellness Center, 7 p.m., in Tuesday's time slot. Her handwriting looked shakier than usual. There, she said. I wrote it down. That means I have to do it, right? Only if you want to, Alan said. But yeah, putting it in your planner is pretty much a sacred commitment for you, so I'd say you're definitely going. That night, Yvette lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of her roommates settling into sleep, Alan's soft breathing, Sam turning pages in whatever book they were reading, the gentle hum of the mini fridge. Instead of reviewing her to-do list for tomorrow like she usually did, she found herself thinking about the Maybe Group. What would it be like to sit in a room with other people who didn't have their identities figured out? Would it be comforting to discover she wasn't alone in her confusion, or would it be overwhelming to be surrounded by uncertainty? What if the other group members expected her to share personal details she wasn't ready to discuss? What if she realized she didn't belong anywhere, even in a group specifically for people who didn't know where they belonged? On Sunday, she did something she'd never done before in her college planning process. She called her mom not to report on her academic progress or ask for practical advice, but to talk through her anxiety about something completely outside her comfort zone. Sweetie, you sound nervous, Linda said after they'd covered the basics about classes and roommate life. Is everything okay? I'm thinking about going to a support group, Yvette said, then quickly added, not because anything's wrong. Just because I'm trying to figure out some personal stuff and I think it might be helpful to talk to other people who are dealing with similar questions. What kind of personal stuff? Yvette took a deep breath. Identity stuff. Like, romantic orientation and attraction and... I'm just confused about some feelings I've been having, and I don't know how to make sense of them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yvette held her breath, waiting for her mom's reaction. Well, Linda said finally, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing a support group could help with. Are you nervous about going? Terrified, Yvette admitted. That's understandable. It takes courage to seek support, especially for something so personal. But honey, you've always been good at reaching out for help when you need it, with tutoring, with college applications, with organizing your life. This is just another area where you're being smart about getting the resources you need. Yvette felt her shoulders relax slightly. Really? Really? And you know what? Even if this particular group doesn't turn out to be the right fit, you'll have learned something about yourself and what you're looking for. That's never wasted effort. On Monday night, Yvette sat at her desk with her journal, trying to process her anxiety about the next evening's group meeting. Instead of her usual bullet-pointed reflection format, she found herself writing in full paragraphs. I keep thinking about what Alan said about uncertainty being a doorway instead of a problem to be solved. For most of my life, not knowing something has felt like failing. But maybe there's a difference between not knowing because you haven't done the research, and not knowing because the thing you're trying to understand is still developing. I don't know what I'll find tomorrow night, but I know that sitting in my room researching attraction theory isn't getting me any closer to understanding my own experience. Maybe it's time to stop trying to figure everything out in isolation and start learning from other people who are asking similar questions. I'm scared I won't fit in, but I'm more scared of staying stuck in this loop of analysis without experience. Sam was right, some things can only be learned by living them. Tuesday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Atlanta. Yvette changed clothes 3 times, trying to find an outfit that felt authentic without making any particular statement about her identity. She settled on jeans and a soft green sweater that Alan had complimented, along with her favorite earrings for confidence. "You look great," Sam said, looking up from their homework as Yvette gathered her keys and student ID. "And you're going to be fine. What if I freeze up and can't think of anything to say?" "Then you listen," Alan said from his bed, where he was organizing art supplies. "Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer a group is thoughtful attention. You're good at that. What if I realize I don't actually belong there?" "Then you leave and try something else," Sam said simply. "But Yvette, what if you realize you do belong there? What if you find your people?" Yvette nodded, took a deep breath, and headed for the door. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," Alan called after her. "You just need courage, and you already have that." The campus wellness center was a modern building she'd passed dozens of times but never entered. The lobby had comfortable seating areas and inspirational posters about mental health and self-care. A directory by the elevator indicated that various support groups met in conference rooms on the second floor. Yvette rode the elevator up, her heart beating faster with each floor. Room 204 had a simple sign on the door, "Maybe Group, 7 p.m. She could hear voices inside, not loud or overwhelming, just the gentle murmur of people talking. She stood outside the door for a full minute, hand raised to knock, trying to work up the nerve to actually enter. "This is ridiculous," she told herself. "It's just a door. Just knock." But it wasn't just a door. It was the threshold between her old approach to identity, research, analysis, categorization, and something completely unknown. It was the line between figuring things out alone and figuring things out in community. She thought about her conversation with Alan and Sam about uncertainty being a doorway instead of a problem. She thought about her mom's encouragement and her own journal entry about learning by living instead of just thinking. Before she could change her mind, she knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman with graying dark hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She looked to be in her 30s, with an expression that somehow managed to be both professional and genuinely welcoming. "Hi there," the woman said warmly. "I'm Dr. Lancaster. Are you here for Maybe Group?" "Yes," Yvette managed. "I'm Yvette. This is my first time." "Welcome, Yvette. We're just getting started. Come in." Yvette stepped into the room and immediately felt some of her anxiety ease. It was set up as a circle of comfortable chairs, with soft lighting and a few plants that made it feel more like someone's living room than an institutional space. 6 other students were already seated, ranging in age from what looked like first years to upperclassmen. They looked like regular people, not particularly confident or put together or like they had everything figured out. "Everyone, we have a new member tonight," Dr. Lancaster said as she and Yvette took the remaining chairs. "This is Yvette. Would you like to share anything about what brought you here tonight?" Yvette felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and her carefully prepared introduction completely disappeared from her mind. She started over. "I've been trying to figure out my romantic orientation, and I realized that researching it online wasn't actually helping me understand my own feelings. My roommate suggested that maybe talking to other people who are asking similar questions might be more useful than trying to analyze everything by myself. A student with short dark hair and paint-stained fingers nodded enthusiastically. Oh wow, yes. I spent so much time trying to find the perfect label that fit my experience exactly, and it just made me more confused. I'm Jordan, by the way. I'm Alex, said another student, fidgeting with what looked like several rings. And I totally relate to the research approach. I made spreadsheets about my feelings for like 6 months before I found this group. Spreadsheets? Yvette asked, feeling a spark of recognition. Color-coded by type of attraction, with numerical ratings for intensity, Alex said with a slightly embarrassed grin. It turns out that feelings don't actually work like engineering problems, but it took me a while to learn that. Dr. Lancaster smiled. It sounds like you two might have some interesting perspectives to share with each other. Alex has been with us for about a month now. As the group continued around the circle, brief introductions, check-ins about everyone's week, Yvette felt something she hadn't expected: relief. These weren't people who had their identities figured out and were here to fine-tune minor details. They were people who used words like confused and uncertain and still figuring it out without apologizing for it. When Dr. Lancaster opened the floor for discussion, Jordan raised their hand. I've been thinking about something we talked about a few weeks ago, about how questioning can feel like failure if you're used to having clear answers about yourself. But what if questioning is actually its own valid identity? Like, what if "I don't know yet" is a perfectly legitimate place to be? Can you say more about that? Dr. Lancaster asked. Well, I've been identifying as non-binary for about a year now, but lately I've been wondering if that label still fits my experience. And instead of panicking about being inconsistent, I'm trying to think of it as ongoing exploration. Like, maybe I don't have to land on a permanent answer. Maybe the exploration itself is the point. Yvette found herself leaning forward. I've never thought about it that way. I keep assuming that questioning is just the uncomfortable phase you have to get through to reach certainty. But what if it's not? Asked another group member, a sophomore named Taylor. What if some of us are just people who experience identity as fluid or evolving? What if the goal isn't to find the right answer, but to get comfortable with ongoing questions? That's terrifying and also kind of liberating, Yvette said before she could stop herself. Dr. Lancaster turned to her with interest. Can you say more about both of those feelings? It's terrifying because I'm used to being able to figure things out if I work hard enough and gather enough information. The idea that some questions might not have definitive answers makes me feel out of control, I guess. But it's also liberating because it means I can stop pressuring myself to have everything categorized perfectly before I'm allowed to act on my feelings or explore connections with people. That's beautifully put, Dr. Lancaster said. And it sounds like you're describing one of the core tensions many people experience when they start questioning: the discomfort of uncertainty balanced against the freedom it can provide. The discussion continued for another 40 minutes, covering topics from coming out to family members who expected certainty, to navigating dating when you weren't sure what you were looking for, to the difference between sexual and romantic attraction. Yvette found herself participating more naturally than she'd expected, asking questions and sharing observations that other group members responded to with nods and murmured agreements. As the meeting wound down, Jordan approached her. Hey, a few of us usually grab coffee after group meetings. Want to join us? No pressure, but it might be nice to continue some of these conversations in a more casual setting. Yvette looked around the room at the faces that had become familiar over the past hour and a half. These were people who understood the particular anxiety of not having clear answers about fundamental aspects of identity. They were people who had made space for uncertainty without treating it as something to be fixed immediately. Yes, she said. I'd really like that. Walking across campus toward the coffee shop with Jordan, Alex, and 2 other group members, Yvette felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at college: the relief of belonging somewhere without having to pretend she had everything figured out. So, Alex said as they settled around a table with their drinks, what did you think of your first meeting? Honestly? It was nothing like I expected, Yvette said. I thought it would be more like therapeutic or formal. But it felt more like hanging out with friends who happened to understand a very specific type of confusion. That's exactly what it is, Jordan said. Dr. Lancaster is great at creating that atmosphere. Like, it's supportive and structured enough to feel safe, but casual enough that you can just be yourself. Even if yourself is a confused mess? Yvette asked. Especially if yourself is a confused mess, said Taylor, grinning. We're all confused messes here. It's kind of our thing. As Yvette walked back to her dorm later that evening, she realized that for the first time since starting college, she felt genuinely excited about an aspect of personal exploration that couldn't be planned or optimized. She'd found her people who understood that identity could be a question instead of an answer, and that questioning could be a destination instead of just a rest stop on the way to certainty. Back in room 317, she found Alan and Sam exactly where she'd left them, doing homework but clearly waiting for her return. How was it? Sam asked immediately. Really good, Yvette said, settling at her desk and opening her journal. Really, really good. I think I might have found my community. Tell us everything, Alan said, closing his textbook and giving her his full attention. And for the next hour, Yvette did exactly that, describing the relief of being in a room where uncertainty was normalized, the comfort of meeting other people who approached feelings analytically, the way Dr. Lancaster facilitated discussions that felt both structured and organic. She told them about Jordan's perspective on questioning as its own valid identity, about Alex's abandoned spreadsheets, about the coffee shop conversation that felt like the beginning of real friendships. I'm going back next week, she said as she finished recounting the evening. And probably the week after that, and the week after that. That's wonderful, Sam said. You look lighter, somehow. Yvette considered this, pen poised over her journal page. I think I feel lighter. Like, I still don't have answers about my romantic orientation, but I don't feel like that's a personal failing anymore. It's just where I am right now. Look at you, Alan said with obvious pride, getting comfortable with not knowing. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Yvette said, but she was smiling as she said it. I'm getting comfortable with being uncomfortable about not knowing. That feels like progress. As she wrote her reflection entry that night, Yvette found herself using different language than she'd ever used in her self-analysis before. Today I crossed a threshold I didn't even know I was approaching. I walked into a room full of strangers and admitted that I don't know something fundamental about myself, and instead of judgment or advice about how to fix my uncertainty, I found acceptance and community. I'm still confused about my feelings for Maya and Jake and the whole question of romantic orientation. But now I know that confusion doesn't mean I'm broken or behind. It means I'm human, and human identity is complex and evolving and doesn't always fit into neat categories. Maybe the point isn't to solve the puzzle of who I am. Maybe the point is to get comfortable living in the question. Chapter 4, The Search Begins. 2 weeks after her first maybe group meeting, Yvette sat in her usual spot in the circle with a fresh notebook dedicated entirely to what she had privately labeled her identity exploration documentation. She'd color-coded different sections, blue for her own experiences and reactions, green for insights from other group members, purple for patterns she'd identified, and red for questions that still needed answers. Dr. Lancaster was facilitating a discussion about the difference between romantic and aesthetic attraction, and Yvette was taking detailed notes while simultaneously trying to categorize each person's contribution according to the framework she'd been developing. I think for me, Jordan was saying, aesthetic attraction is more about appreciating someone's appearance or style without wanting to pursue any kind of relationship. Like seeing a beautiful painting, you can appreciate it without wanting to take it home. Yvette wrote this down under Jordan, non-binary. Aesthetic attraction equals appreciation without desire for connection. She'd been tracking each group member's journey, trying to identify patterns that might help her understand her own experience. But what about when aesthetic attraction combines with other types? Asked Alex, fidgeting with their rings. Like, I can find someone aesthetically beautiful and also be drawn to their personality, but not know if that's friendship or something else. Alex, engineering major, analytical approach, struggles with combo attractions, Yvette noted, then looked up as Dr. Lancaster turned toward her. Yvette, you've been taking very thorough notes, Dr. Lancaster observed with a gentle smile. What thoughts are you having about this discussion? Yvette glanced at her notebook, where she'd been trying to map out different types of attraction like variables in an equation. I guess I'm trying to understand if there are clear distinctions between these categories, or if they exist on more of a spectrum. Like, is aesthetic attraction always separate from romantic attraction, or can they overlap in ways that create hybrid experiences? Taylor, a sophomore who'd been attending for several months, laughed sympathetically. You're doing the thing I did when I first started coming here, trying to create a comprehensive taxonomy of human attraction. Is that bad? Yvette asked, suddenly self-conscious. Not bad, Dr. Lancaster said, but possibly limiting. What do you think Taylor means? Taylor shifted in their chair, choosing their words carefully. I spent months trying to create the perfect diagram of how all the different types of attraction related to each other, with clear boundaries and definitions. I thought if I could just understand the system well enough, I'd be able to plug in my experiences and get a clear answer about my identity. And? Yvette prompted. And it turned out that human feelings are way messier than any system I could design. The categories are useful for communication and general understanding, but individual experiences don't always fit neatly into them. Yvette felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. But then how do you make sense of what you're feeling? How do you know what to call yourself? Maybe, Jordan said softly, that's not the right question. Dr. Lancaster leaned forward slightly, her expression encouraging Jordan to continue. I mean, Jordan went on, what if instead of asking what category do my feelings fit into, we asked what do my feelings tell me about what I want or need? The label is just shorthand for communicating with other people, but the experience is what actually matters for your life. Yvette stared at her notebook, where she'd been trying to create a decision tree for romantic orientation determination. That sounds terrifying. Like, without categories, how do you know if you're normal? How do you know if your experience is valid? Your experience is valid because it's yours, Dr. Lancaster said simply. It doesn't need to fit into a pre-existing category to be real and important. But, Yvette said, her voice getting slightly higher with stress, surely there are patterns? I've been tracking everyone's descriptions of their experiences, and there do seem to be commonalities. Like, Alex and I both approach attraction analytically, and we both struggle with distinguishing between intellectual appreciation and romantic interest. Jordan and Morgan both describe their gender identity as fluid rather than fixed. There have to be underlying structures we can identify. A newer member named Casey, who reminded Yvette of her younger self, nodded eagerly. Yes. I've been wondering the same thing. Like, if we could just map out all the possible combinations of different attraction types, we could figure out where we fit. Jordan and Alex exchanged a look that Yvette was beginning to recognize, the expression of people who had been through this particular phase of questioning. Can I share something? Jordan asked. When I first started questioning my gender identity, I spent hours online reading about every possible non-binary identity. Demigirl, gender flux, neutrois, agender, I researched them all, trying to find the one that fit my experience exactly. What happened? Casey asked. I realized I was spending so much time trying to find the right label that I wasn't actually paying attention to how I felt or what I wanted. I was looking for external validation instead of internal understanding. Yvette's pen stopped moving across her notebook. What do you mean? I mean, I was so focused on finding a category that fit me perfectly that I wasn't asking myself what would actually make me happy or feel authentic. I was trying to solve my identity like a puzzle instead of living it like an experience. But categories are useful, Yvette protested. They help you understand yourself and communicate with others and find community. Absolutely, Dr. Lancaster agreed. Categories and labels can be incredibly valuable tools. The question is whether you're using them as tools to support your self-understanding, or as requirements that you have to fit yourself into. Alex leaned forward. When I first came to this group, I had spreadsheets tracking my feelings about different people, trying to quantify romantic versus platonic versus aesthetic attraction. It was a way of feeling like I was making progress on figuring myself out. What changed? Yvette asked. I realized that the feelings I was trying to measure weren't actually measurable. Like, the difference between really strong friendship feelings and romantic feelings wasn't a matter of intensity, it was more about quality, texture. I couldn't capture that in numbers. Yvette looked at her carefully organized notes, feeling a familiar sense of frustration. But then how did you figure anything out? How did you make decisions about dating or relationships? I started paying attention to what I actually wanted instead of what category my feelings fit into, Alex said. Like, instead of asking, is this romantic attraction? I started asking, do I want to spend more time with this person? Do I want to get to know them better? Do I feel comfortable and authentic around them? Those are questions I could actually answer. And, Jordan added, I stopped treating identity like a test I needed to pass and started treating it like an ongoing conversation with myself. Like, instead of trying to find the perfect label once and for all, I started thinking about what words felt true for me right now, knowing that might change as I continued learning about myself. Yvette felt something shift uncomfortably in her chest. That sounds incredibly uncertain. How do you live with that much ambiguity? The same way you live with any other kind of uncertainty, Dr. Lancaster said. By focusing on what you do know and taking small steps based on your current understanding, while staying open to new information. Like what? Well, what do you know about yourself right now, even without perfect labels? Yvette consulted her notes, then set them aside and tried to think about her actual experiences instead of her analysis of them. I know that I'm curious about some people in ways that feel different from academic curiosity. I know that I want to understand my own feelings better, not just categorize them. I know that being in this group feels good in a way that researching online didn't. Those are all important pieces of self-knowledge, Dr. Lancaster said. What could you do with that information? I could spend time with the people I'm curious about and see how those connections develop. I could keep coming to this group and talking through my experiences instead of just analyzing them. I could try to be more present with my feelings instead of immediately trying to label them. All of those sound like productive approaches, Jordan said. And none of them require you to have your identity completely figured out first. After the meeting ended, Yvette found herself walking to the coffee shop with Jordan, Alex, and Casey, but instead of feeling energized by the discussion, she felt oddly deflated. You seem thoughtful, Jordan observed as they settled around their usual table. I guess I'm realizing that my approach to all of this might be counterproductive, Yvette admitted. Like, I've been treating identity exploration like a research project, but everyone keeps saying that's not how it works. It's not that research and analysis are bad, Alex said quickly. It's more that they're just one tool, and they're not always the most useful tool for understanding feelings. But they're the tools I'm good at, Yvette said, frustration creeping into her voice. I don't know how to explore identity without structure and frameworks and clear goals. Casey nodded enthusiastically. Yes. Like, how do you just be present with your feelings? What does that even mean practically? Jordan smiled sympathetically. I think it's different for everyone, but for me, it means paying attention to my immediate responses to things instead of immediately trying to analyze or categorize them. Like, when I meet someone new, instead of thinking, what type of attraction am I experiencing? I try to notice what's actually happening in my body and mind. Do I feel energized or calm? Am I curious about them or indifferent? Do I want to learn more about them or am I satisfied with surface-level interaction? And then what? Yvette asked. And then I let those observations inform my choices about how to engage with that person, without needing to have a full understanding of what it all means first. Alex nodded. For me, it helped to think of feelings like weather, something you experience and respond to, rather than something you control or fully understand. Like, you don't need to understand meteorology to know whether you want to bring an umbrella. Yvette considered this, absently stirring her latte. That metaphor actually makes sense to me. But it also makes me nervous, because I'm used to understanding systems before I interact with them. What if, Casey said hesitantly, we tried practicing that approach together? Like, what if we paid attention to our feelings about things happening right now instead of trying to analyze them? What do you mean? Yvette asked. Well, like, how do you feel about this conversation we're having right now? Yvette started to give an analytical response, then caught herself. Actually, I feel nervous and curious at the same time. Nervous because you're asking me to do something that feels vulnerable and unfamiliar. Curious because I can tell you're suggesting something that might be helpful, and I want to understand it better. See? Jordan said with obvious delight. You just described your internal experience without categorizing or analyzing it. How did that feel? Weird, Yvette admitted. But also, more accurate than if I'd tried to put my feelings into categories first. Want to try another one? Alex asked. Yvette looked around the table at these people who had become genuinely important to her over the past few weeks. Okay, but you have to do it too. Deal. How do I feel about this group of people? Yvette said, more to herself than to them. Safe. Understood. Like I can say things I'm not sure about and you won't judge me for not having perfect clarity. Also grateful, because I didn't know I needed this kind of community until I found it. My turn, Casey said. How do I feel about being new to questioning? Overwhelmed, but also relieved that other people are confused too. Like maybe I'm not broken or behind everyone else. Alex went next. How do I feel about the conversation we just had in group? Hopeful, because I remember feeling exactly the way Yvette and Casey are feeling now, and I know it gets easier. Also proud of how far I've come in learning to trust my own experience instead of looking for external validation. Jordan finished. How do I feel about watching you all navigate this process? Protective, because I remember how vulnerable it feels to question fundamental things about yourself. And honored, because it means a lot that you trust me enough to be uncertain around me. Yvette sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the depth and honesty of their responses. That was really beautiful, actually. Like, I learned more about all of you from those answers than I would have from knowing your specific identity labels. That's the thing, Jordan said softly. The experience is what matters. The labels are just helpful shorthand. Walking back to her dorm later, Yvette found herself trying to apply this new approach to her ongoing questions about Maya and Jake. Instead of asking herself, what type of attraction am I experiencing, she tried asking, how do I feel when I think about them? Maya, curious, energized, wanting to know more about her thoughts and perspectives, imagining conversations that could last for hours. Jake, comfortable, amused, appreciating his sense of humor but not particularly drawn to deeper connection. It wasn't definitive information, but it was more actionable than her previous analytical approach had been. She wanted to spend more time with Maya and see where that curiosity led. She enjoyed Jake's company in the context they already shared, but didn't feel compelled to seek out additional connection. Back in room 317, she found Alan and Sam in their usual evening spots, Alan sketching at his desk, Sam reading in bed. How was group? Sam asked immediately. Challenging, Yvette said, settling at her desk and opening her notebook. But instead of writing her usual detailed analysis, she found herself staring at the blank page. Good challenging or bad challenging? Alan asked, looking up from his drawing. I think good challenging. Jordan and Alex basically told me that I'm approaching identity exploration like a research project, and that might be getting in my way. Ah, Sam said with obvious understanding. The classic academic trap. What do you mean? I mean the assumption that you can think your way to understanding something that might need to be experienced to be understood. Yvette considered this. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what they were saying. But I don't know how to explore things without structure and analysis. Those are my tools. They don't have to be your only tools, Alan said gently. Like, you can still use your analytical skills, but maybe in service of paying attention to your experiences instead of trying to categorize them before you've actually had them. Can you give me an example? Alan set down his pencil and turned to face her fully. Okay, so you've told us about being curious about Maya, right? Your analytical approach has been trying to figure out whether that curiosity counts as romantic attraction before you do anything about it. An experiential approach might be asking yourself what you'd actually like to do about that curiosity, and then seeing how it feels to take small steps in that direction. What kind of small steps? I don't know, babe. What would feel natural to you? What would honor your curiosity without requiring you to have everything figured out first? Yvette thought about this. I guess I could try to have actual conversations with her instead of just listening to her participate in class discussions. Maybe ask if she wants to study together, or grab coffee after lit class. And then what? And then, see how those interactions feel. Pay attention to whether spending time with her satisfies my curiosity or makes me want to know her better. Exactly, Sam said approvingly. You're collecting experiential data instead of just theoretical data. Yvette picked up her pen and wrote at the top of her journal page, experiential approach to Maya's situation. Below that, she wrote, goal, honor curiosity through small, authentic interactions. Pay attention to feelings during and after, without pressure to categorize them immediately. That feels manageable, she said, more to herself than to her roommates. How does it feel different from your previous approach? Alan asked. Yvette thought about this. Less pressure to get it right, I guess. Like, if I have coffee with Maya and it turns out I just want to be friends with her, that's valuable information. If it turns out I want something more than friendship, that's also valuable information. Either way, I learn something about myself through experience instead of through speculation. And, Sam added, you get to build a real connection with another person, regardless of what category that connection falls into. Right. Yvette wrote this down too. The relationship is valuable in itself, not just as a source of data about my identity. Look at you, Alan said with obvious pride, learning to live your life instead of just analyzing it. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Yvette said, but she was smiling as she wrote. I'm learning to analyze my life less obsessively while still honoring my need for some structure and understanding. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable balance, Sam said. As Yvette continued writing her reflection that night, she found herself using language that felt more authentic and less clinical than her previous entries. Today I learned that my approach to identity exploration might be getting in my way instead of helping me. I've been so focused on finding the right categories for my experiences that I haven't been fully present for the experiences themselves. Jordan and Alex helped me understand that feelings aren't data points to be analyzed, they're lived experiences to be honored and explored. I don't have to understand everything about my attraction to Maya before I'm allowed to spend time with her and see how that connection develops. I'm still scared of uncertainty, but I'm starting to think that might be because I've been treating uncertainty as a problem to be solved instead of a natural part of being human. Maybe the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty, but to get more comfortable living with it while still taking authentic action. Tomorrow, ask Maya if she wants to study for our midterm together. Not because I've figured out what my feelings for her mean, but because I'm curious about her and want to honor that curiosity. Chapter 5, Testing Hypotheses. Maya? Hi, it's Yvette from Professor Chen's lit class. Yvette stood outside the classroom building, phone pressed to her ear, trying to sound casual despite having practiced this conversation 3 times in her dorm room mirror. Oh hey. What's up? I was wondering if you'd want to study together for the midterm. I know you always have really insightful things to say in class discussions, and I thought maybe we could help each other review the material. There was a pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds but felt like 3 hours. That sounds great, actually. I was just thinking I needed to find a study partner. The library tonight around 7? Perfect. I'll see you then. Yvette hung up and immediately called Alan. Babe, you did it, his voice came through the phone. How do you feel? Terrified and excited and like I might throw up, Yvette said, walking quickly toward her statistics class. What if I misread her interest in studying together? What if it's awkward? What if I can't tell the difference between friendship feelings and romantic feelings? What if it's wonderful and you learn something important about yourself regardless of what category your feelings fall into? Alan countered. That's what Sam would say too, isn't it? Probably. We've been good influences on you. That evening, Yvette arrived at the library 15 minutes early with color-coded notes and a detailed study plan. Maya showed up exactly on time, carrying a beat-up backpack and a coffee that smelled like vanilla. Wow, you're really organized, Maya said, settling into the chair across from Yvette and surveying the neat piles of materials. I mostly just have random notes scattered throughout 3 different notebooks. I can share my organizational system if you want, Yvette offered. I made topic outlines for each unit and cross-referenced them with the essay questions Professor Chen said might be on the exam. Maya grinned, and Yvette felt something warm and fluttery happen in her chest. You're like a study wizard. Yes, please share your organizational magic. For the next 2 hours, they worked through Victorian literature themes, debating the role of social class in Dickens versus the treatment of women's autonomy in Bronte. Maya turned out to be not just insightful in class discussions, but genuinely brilliant in one-on-one conversation. She made connections Yvette hadn't considered and asked questions that pushed both of them to think more deeply about the material. I never thought about how Tessa's relationship to the landscape reflects her internal sense of agency, Maya said, scribbling notes in the margins of her textbook. That's such a good point about the pastoral scenes versus the industrial ones. You're the one who noticed that the seasonal imagery changes right after her major life transitions, Yvette replied. I completely missed that pattern until you pointed it out. As they packed up their materials, Yvette found herself reluctant for the evening to end. This was really helpful, Maya said. Want to grab coffee sometime this week and go over the essay questions? I'd love that, Yvette said, probably too quickly. Walking back to her dorm, Yvette tried to apply the experiential approach Jordan and Alex had suggested. How had the study session felt? Energizing. Natural. Like she could have talked to Maya for hours about literature or anything else. She'd been genuinely present for the conversation instead of trying to analyze her feelings while having them. But she still couldn't tell if what she was experiencing was intellectual compatibility, friendship chemistry, or romantic attraction. 2 days later, she found herself at coffee with Alex after their regular maybe group meeting, trying to sort through her confusion. So the study session went well, Alex said, stirring sugar into their latte, but you're still not sure what your feelings mean? Exactly. Like, I know I enjoyed spending time with her, and I want to do it again, but I can't tell if that's because I want to be friends with her or because I'm romantically interested. Yvette opened her journal, which had evolved from clinical analysis to something more like experiential documentation. I keep thinking there should be some clear signal that tells you the difference. What if there isn't? Alex asked. What if some connections exist in the space between friendship and romance, or move back and forth between categories? Yvette looked up from her notes. That sounds impossibly complicated. Or beautifully simple, depending on how you look at it. Alex played with their rings, a habit Yvette had learned meant they were thinking carefully about something. Can I tell you about something that happened to me last month? Please. I met this person, River, in my thermodynamics class. Brilliant engineer, really funny, kind of androgynous in a way that I found aesthetically appealing. We started studying together, and I kept trying to figure out if I was attracted to them romantically or just appreciated their mind and their style. What did you figure out? That those categories weren't actually useful for describing my experience. Like, I was definitely attracted to them, but not in a way that made me want to date them or kiss them or anything traditionally romantic. I wanted to spend time with them, learn how they thought about problems, maybe hold hands sometimes because they had nice hands. It was attraction, but not romantic attraction in any conventional sense. Yvette wrote this down. So what did you do about it? I told them I was interested in being close to them but wasn't sure what form that closeness might take. Turns out they were feeling something similar, attracted to me in a way that didn't fit standard categories either. And we decided to explore that connection without worrying about what to call it. We spend time together, we're physically affectionate in ways that feel natural, we talk about deep stuff, we care about each other's lives. Some people might call it friendship, others might call it romance. We call it our thing. Yvette felt something shift in her understanding. That sounds, actually really appealing. Like, the connection matters more than the category. Exactly. And it took the pressure off trying to perform romance or friendship according to other people's definitions. We could just be authentic about what we actually wanted from each other. But how did you bring that up with them? How do you have that conversation? Alex grinned. Very awkwardly, at first. But I basically said what I just told you, that I was attracted to them in a way that didn't fit conventional categories, and I was curious if they'd be interested in exploring what kind of connection felt natural between us. And they said yes? They said they'd been wondering the same thing about me. Yvette sat quietly for a moment, processing this. I think I might be overthinking the Maya situation. How so? I've been trying to figure out whether my feelings for her count as romantic attraction before I let myself pursue any kind of closer connection. But what if I just told her I enjoyed our study session and was curious about spending more time together, and let the nature of our connection develop organically? That sounds like a perfectly reasonable approach, Alex said. What's the worst thing that could happen? She could not be interested in spending more time together? And then you'd know that, and you could focus your energy on connections that are mutual. That would be disappointing, but not catastrophic. What's the best thing that could happen? You could discover that you have a meaningful connection with someone who appreciates your mind and your company, regardless of what category that connection falls into. That evening, Yvette found herself in an unexpected situation. She'd texted Maya about getting coffee to review essay questions, and Maya had suggested meeting at a wine bar instead, since they were both over 21 and she was tired of studying in places that felt academic. Now they sat across from each other in a dimly lit corner booth, sharing a plate of cheese and talking about everything except Victorian literature. I love how your brain works, Maya was saying, gesturing with her wine glass. Like, in class today when you connected the hearty reading to that point Professor Chen made about narrative reliability last week? I never would have seen that pattern, but once you pointed it out, it was so obvious. Yvette felt heat rise in her cheeks. I like finding connections between ideas. It helps me make sense of complex material. It's more than that, though. You have this way of listening that makes people want to share their real thoughts, not just their polished analysis. Really? Really? Like right now, I'm telling you things I don't usually tell people I've only known for a few weeks. Yvette took a sip of her wine, trying to process the warmth spreading through her chest. Was this romantic chemistry? Deep conversation chemistry? The wine making everything feel more intense than it actually was? Can I tell you something? Maya said, leaning forward slightly. Of course. I was hoping you'd ask me to study together. I've been wanting to get to know you better since the beginning of the semester, but I wasn't sure if you were interested in spending time together outside of class. Yvette's heart started beating faster. I was hoping the same thing about you. Really? Really? I mean, I notice when you're not in class, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts during discussions, and when we studied together the other night, I didn't want it to end. Maya smiled, and Yvette noticed for the first time that she had a tiny scar through her left eyebrow. So where does that leave us? This was the moment Yvette would normally panic, trying to categorize her feelings before responding. Instead, she heard herself saying, I'm not sure, but I'd like to find out. I know I enjoy your company and I'm curious about you as a person, and I think that's enough for now. That sounds perfect to me. They stayed until the wine bar closed, talking about their families, their plans after college, their favorite books that had nothing to do with their literature class. When they finally parted ways outside Yvette's dorm building, Maya hugged her goodnight, a full, warm hug that lasted several seconds longer than casual friendship usually required. Walking up to her room, Yvette felt like she was floating. Not because she'd figured out what her feelings for Maya meant, but because she'd honored those feelings without needing to label them first. How was your date? Alan asked immediately when she walked in. It wasn't a date, Yvette said automatically, then paused. Actually, I don't know what it was. But it was wonderful. Tell us everything, Sam said, closing their textbook and giving her full attention. As Yvette recounted the evening, she found herself describing Maya's intelligence, her laugh, the way she made eye contact when she was really listening, the comfort of their conversation, the warmth of her goodbye hug. You sound happy, Sam observed. I am happy. But I'm also confused, because I still can't tell if what I'm feeling is romantic or just intense friendship potential. Does it matter right now? Alan asked. What do you mean? I mean, you had a wonderful evening with someone whose company you enjoy. You made plans to spend more time together. You're both interested in getting to know each other better. That's all good stuff, regardless of what category it eventually falls into. Yvette considered this. I guess I keep waiting for some definitive feeling that tells me this is romantic or this is friendship. What if that definitive feeling doesn't exist for you? Sam suggested. What if your experience of attraction is more subtle or complex than the dramatic crush narratives most people describe? You think some people just don't have obvious romantic feelings? I think some people have romantic feelings that don't fit the standard script, Sam said. Like Alex and their thing with River. Like Alan's fluid attraction that changes based on context. Like my appreciation for people that doesn't include romantic or sexual components but is still meaningful connection. So what do I do with Maya? Keep spending time with her, Alan suggested. Keep being honest about what you're experiencing. Keep paying attention to how different types of interaction feel. Let the relationship develop at its own pace instead of trying to force it into a predetermined category. That night, Yvette's journal entry was the most honest she'd ever written. Tonight I had wine and conversation with Maya, and it was the first time in weeks that I wasn't thinking about identity labels while actually living my life. I was just present with someone I find fascinating, and it felt natural and right in a way that my analytical approach never has. I still don't know if I'm romantically attracted to Maya or if I just experience deep connection differently than other people. But I'm starting to think that might not be the right question. Maybe the right question is, do I want to continue building this connection? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. I'm also realizing that my friendship with Alex is teaching me something important about how attraction can exist outside traditional categories. They found a way to honor their feelings for River without forcing them into conventional romance or friendship boxes. Maybe I can learn to do the same thing. It's still scary not to know what my feelings mean, but it's less scary than it used to be. And for the first time, I'm more curious than anxious about where this exploration might lead. The next week brought an unexpected development. Yvette was studying in the library when she noticed a guy from her statistics class sitting alone, looking frustrated as he worked through problem sets. Jake, the one she'd noted as funny and smart but hadn't thought much about beyond their classroom interactions. Something prompted her to walk over. Hey, Jake. You look like you're wrestling with the regression analysis assignment. He looked up with obvious relief. Yvette. Yes, I'm completely stuck on the third problem. I understand the concept, but I can't get the calculations to work out right. Want me to take a look? I just finished that section. For the next hour, they worked through statistical concepts together. Jake turned out to be not just funny in class, but genuinely engaging one-on-one. He asked thoughtful questions, made connections between the math and real-world applications, and had a way of explaining things that made complex concepts feel accessible. You're a really good teacher, Yvette said as they finished the problem set. Have you thought about tutoring? Actually, yeah. I've been thinking about applying to be a stats tutor next semester. He grinned. Want to grab dinner and celebrate surviving this assignment? The invitation surprised Yvette, but she found herself saying yes. Dinner turned into 2 hours of conversation about everything from their shared psychology interests to their different career goals to their favorite terrible movies. Jake was easy to talk to in a way that felt comfortable and uncomplicated. He made her laugh, listened to her stories about roommate dynamics, and shared his own experiences of adjusting to college life. When they parted ways outside the dining hall, Jake said, "This was really fun. Want to do it again sometime?" "I'd like that," Yvette said, and meant it. Walking back to her dorm, she found herself in familiar analytical territory. She enjoyed Jake's company, but in a way that felt completely different from her interactions with Maya. With Maya, she felt energized and curious and slightly nervous in a way that made her more aware of her own body and reactions. With Jake, she felt comfortable and entertained and genuinely fond, but without the underlying current of something that she experienced with Maya. Was that the difference between friendship and romantic attraction? The presence or absence of that underlying current? But then she thought about Alex and River, and their connection that didn't fit traditional categories. Maybe the distinction wasn't as clear-cut as she was trying to make it. At the next maybe group meeting, she found herself sharing these experiences for the first time. "I've been spending time with 2 different people lately," she said during the check-in portion of the meeting, "and I'm noticing that the connections feel different from each other, but I'm not sure what those differences mean in terms of romantic versus platonic attraction." "Can you say more about how they feel different?" Dr. Lancaster asked. "With Maya, there's this energy, I guess. Like, I'm more aware of myself when I'm around her, and I notice details about her that I don't usually notice about people. Her expressions, her gestures, the way she thinks through problems. With Jake, I feel more relaxed and comfortable, like talking to a really good friend, but without that heightened awareness." Jordan nodded. "That sounds like you're experiencing different types of connection with different people. Does one type feel more correct than the other?" "That's just it, they both feel good, but in different ways. Like, I want to spend time with both of them, but for different reasons and with different expectations, maybe?" "What kind of expectations?" Dr. Lancaster prompted. Yvette thought about this. "With Maya, I find myself wondering what it would be like to be closer to her physically. Not necessarily sexually, but touching her hair, or holding her hand, or sitting closer together. With Jake, I don't really think about physical closeness, but I do think about sharing experiences and having long conversations." "So," Alex said, "it sounds like you might be experiencing aesthetic and romantic attraction toward Maya, and platonic attraction toward Jake?" "Maybe. But I still don't know if what I'm feeling toward Maya counts as romantic attraction, because it doesn't feel like the dramatic crush feelings people always describe." Taylor laughed sympathetically. "I think you might be expecting romantic attraction to feel like a Disney movie. For a lot of people, it's more subtle than that." "What do you mean?" "I mean, romantic attraction doesn't always feel like being struck by lightning. Sometimes it feels like curiosity about intimacy with a specific person. Interest in sharing physical affection. Wanting to prioritize that person's company over other activities. Noticing them in ways you don't notice other people." Yvette felt something click into place. "That actually describes what I'm experiencing with Maya pretty well. And there's nothing wrong with the way you experience attraction just because it doesn't match cultural scripts about overwhelming passion," Dr. Lancaster added. "Your feelings are valid regardless of their intensity or how they compare to other people's experiences." After the meeting, Alex walked with her to the coffee shop, continuing their increasingly frequent post-group conversations. "Can I tell you something?" Alex said as they settled at their usual table. "I've been thinking about our conversations these past few weeks, and I feel like I understand myself better because of talking through these things with you." "Really? How so?" "Your analytical approach actually helps me articulate things I experience but don't always have words for. Like, when you talked tonight about noticing details about Maya that you don't notice about other people. That helped me understand something about my own aesthetic attraction that I've never been able to explain before." Yvette felt a warm rush of recognition. "That's exactly how I feel about our conversations. Like, you help me see that there are ways to honor feelings without having to categorize them perfectly first. We're like complementary questioning styles," Alex said with a grin. "You bring structure to the exploration, and I bring permission to be uncertain." "I really value our friendship," Yvette said, surprising herself with the directness of the statement. "Me too," Alex said. "Actually, I've been thinking, would you want to be accountability partners for this whole identity exploration thing? Like, check in with each other regularly about how our various experiments and experiences are going?" "I would love that," Yvette said immediately. "I don't think I could be doing any of this without having people who understand what it's like to question fundamental things about yourself." Walking back to her dorm that night, Yvette realized that her approach to identity exploration had shifted significantly from where she'd started. Instead of trying to research her way to definitive answers, she was living her way to better questions. Instead of analyzing her feelings from a distance, she was experiencing them in real time and letting her understanding evolve organically. She still didn't have clear labels for her romantic orientation, but she had Maya, whose company energized and intrigued her in ways that felt worth exploring further. She had Jake, whose friendship added comfort and laughter to her life. She had Alex, whose analytical mind and generous spirit made her feel understood in a way she'd never experienced before. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe the connections themselves were more important than the categories she put them in. In her journal that night, she wrote, "I'm starting to understand that identity exploration isn't a research project with a definitive endpoint. It's an ongoing conversation with myself about how I want to show up in relationships and what kinds of connections feel authentic and meaningful to me. I still don't know if I'm bisexual or pan or demisexual or something else entirely, but I'm learning to pay attention to my actual experiences rather than trying to make them fit predetermined definitions. And I'm discovering that my way of experiencing attraction might be quieter and more complex than cultural scripts suggested, but that doesn't make it less real or important. Most importantly, I'm building real relationships with people I care about, regardless of what categories those relationships fall into. And that feels like the point of all of this, not to find the right labels, but to find the right people, and to show up authentically in connection with them." Chapter 6, The Maybe Community. The November rain drummed against the windows of the campus wellness center as Yvette settled into her usual chair in the Maybe group circle. Over the past month, this room had become one of the few places where she felt completely comfortable existing in uncertainty. The faces around her had become familiar, trusted, Jordan with their gentle insights, Alex with their engineering-minded approach to emotions, Taylor with their hard-won wisdom about attraction that didn't fit scripts, Casey with their nervous energy that reminded Yvette of her earlier self. "Tonight I thought we might try something a little different," Dr. Lancaster said, her voice carrying the warm authority that had made Yvette feel safe from her very first meeting. "Instead of our usual check-ins, I'd like to invite anyone who's comfortable to share something vulnerable, a fear, a hope, a realization you've been carrying that feels too big or too uncertain to say out loud in other spaces." Yvette felt her pulse quicken slightly. The group had become progressively more open over the weeks, but there were still parts of her questioning journey she'd kept to herself. Jordan spoke first, as they often did when Dr. Lancaster opened space for deeper sharing. "I've been thinking about permanence lately," Jordan said, their soft voice barely audible over the rain. "Like, everyone keeps asking me when I'm going to decide about my gender identity, as if questioning is just a phase you're supposed to graduate from. But what if I never want to graduate from it? What if I like living in the space between definitions? Can you say more about that?" Dr. Lancaster asked gently. "I guess I've realized that questioning feels like home to me. Not because I'm confused or can't make up my mind, but because the in-between space feels like the most honest place for me to exist. I like that my gender expression can shift based on how I'm feeling or what feels authentic on any given day. I like that I don't have to commit to one way of being in the world." Alex nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, exactly. I've been feeling the same way about romantic orientation. Like, what if questioning isn't just a stop on the way to somewhere else? What if it's actually a destination?" Taylor leaned forward. "But doesn't that feel unstable? Like, how do you make decisions about relationships or coming out to family if your identity isn't fixed?" "I think," Jordan said carefully, "there's a difference between being uncertain about who you are, and being certain that who you are includes uncertainty. Like, I'm not confused about my gender, I'm clear that my gender is fluid and questioning and not easily categorized. That's actually a pretty stable identity, it's just not a static one." Yvette felt something resonate deeply in her chest. "That makes so much sense," she said before she could stop herself. "Like, I keep thinking I need to figure out if I'm bisexual or pansexual or demisexual or something else, but what if the answer is just I'm someone whose romantic orientation includes ongoing questioning?" "Exactly," Jordan said with a smile that lit up their entire face. "You're not failing at identity because you haven't landed on a permanent label. You're succeeding at being honest about how you actually experience attraction and connection." Dr. Lancaster turned toward Yvette with interest. "How does that reframe feel for you, Yvette?" "Terrifying and relieving at the same time," Yvette admitted. "Terrifying because it means I can't figure out sexual orientation off my college to-do list. Relieving because it means I can stop pressuring myself to have definitive answers before I'm allowed to live my life." Casey raised their hand tentatively. "But what do you tell people when they ask about your identity?" What do you put on dating profiles or when you're coming out to friends? I've been experimenting with that, Jordan said. Sometimes I just say, I'm queer, because it's accurate and inclusive without being specific. Sometimes I say, I'm questioning, because that's also accurate. Sometimes I give longer explanations if the person seems genuinely interested in understanding. And most of the time, Alex added, I've found that people care less about the specific label than about whether you're being authentic and honest about your experience. Really? Casey asked. Really? Like, my parents were way more concerned about whether I was happy and healthy than about what exact terminology I used to describe my romantic orientation. Yvette thought about her own family. She'd been putting off having identity conversations with her mom because she felt like she needed to have clear answers first. But maybe that wasn't actually necessary. Can I share something vulnerable? She said, surprising herself. Of course, Dr. Lancaster said. I've been spending time with someone, Maya, and I keep trying to figure out if what I'm feeling is romantic attraction or just really intense friendship potential. But lately I've been wondering if that distinction even matters. Like, what if I just told her that I care about her and want to be closer to her, without worrying about which category that closeness falls into? What's scary about that approach? Dr. Lancaster asked. That she might want a different kind of connection than I'm able to give her. Or that I might not be able to articulate what I'm actually offering. Jordan leaned forward with interest. What would you be offering? Yvette thought about this carefully. Myself, I guess. My attention, my care, my curiosity about who she is. Physical affection that feels natural, hand-holding, cuddling, maybe kissing, but without pressure for it to be sexual or romantic in traditional ways. Deep conversation and shared experiences and prioritizing her company. That sounds like a beautiful offer, Taylor said softly. But what if she wants traditional romance? What if she's looking for someone who experiences attraction in more conventional ways? Then you wouldn't be compatible in that particular way, Alex said pragmatically, and that would be disappointing but not a reflection on the validity of what you're able to offer. Plus, Jordan added, you might be surprised by how many people are open to connections that don't fit standard categories, especially if you're honest about what you're experiencing and what you're looking for. Dr. Lancaster nodded. It sounds like you're describing a very authentic way of approaching relationships, being clear about what you have to offer rather than trying to perform a particular type of attraction you're not sure you're experiencing. But how do you have that conversation? Casey asked. How do you say, I'm interested in you but I can't promise I'll experience attraction the way you might expect? You could start with something like what Yvette described, Alex suggested. I care about you and I'm curious about being closer to you, and I'd like to explore what that looks like without predetermined expectations about what form it takes. That's actually not as scary as I thought it would be, Yvette said, writing this down in her journal. It's honest and it opens conversation instead of trying to have all the answers first. Exactly, Jordan said. And it gives the other person space to share their own experience and expectations, so you can figure out together what kind of connection makes sense for both of you. As the meeting continued, Yvette found herself sharing more vulnerably than she ever had before. She talked about her fear of being behind other people in identity development, her struggle with perfectionism in areas where perfection wasn't possible, her growing realization that questioning could be its own valid way of existing in the world. The other group members responded with recognition, validation, and their own similar fears and realizations. Casey talked about feeling like they needed permission to not know things about themselves. Taylor shared their experience of coming out to friends as still figuring it out, and being surprised by how accepting people were. Alex described the relief of finding community with other people whose experiences didn't fit conventional categories. By the time Dr. Lancaster called the meeting to a close, Yvette felt like something fundamental had shifted in her understanding, not just of her own identity, but of what identity exploration could look like when approached as a community practice rather than an individual project. Same time next week? Jordan asked as they gathered their things. Actually, Yvette said, would anyone be interested in getting dinner together sometime this week? Not to talk about identity stuff necessarily, just to hang out as friends. The enthusiasm of the responses surprised her. They made plans for Thursday evening, and Yvette realized that somewhere along the way, these people had become genuine friends, not just fellow travelers in questioning. Walking to the parking lot with Jordan, Yvette found herself wanting to continue their conversation from the meeting. "Can I ask you something about gender fluidity?" she said as they reached Jordan's bike. "I've been thinking about what you said about liking to exist in the in-between space, and I'm curious about how that works practically." "What do you mean?" "Like, how do you navigate things like pronouns, or presentation choices, or explaining yourself to people who want clear categories?" Jordan unlocked their bike, considering the question. "It's different in different contexts, honestly. With people who I trust and who've shown they can handle complexity, I'll explain that my gender expression is fluid and my pronouns might change based on how I'm feeling. With people who seem less equipped for that conversation, I might just use they/them consistently because it's simpler." "And that doesn't feel like you're hiding part of yourself?" "Sometimes it does," Jordan admitted. "But I've learned that not every person or situation requires my full gender complexity. It's kind of like, you probably don't explain your entire psychological profile to everyone you meet, right? You share different aspects of yourself with different people based on the context and the relationship." Yvette nodded. "That makes sense. I guess I've been thinking I need to figure out one consistent identity that I can present to everyone in all situations. But that's not how identity actually works for most people," Jordan said gently. "Like, you probably act a little different with your roommates than you do with your professors, not because you're being fake, but because different relationships call for different aspects of who you are." "Right. And maybe sexual/romantic identity can work the same way, not one fixed label for all contexts, but a more nuanced understanding that I can share differently depending on the situation and relationship." "Exactly. Though," Jordan added with a grin, "it's also okay to want consistent labels if that feels more authentic to you. The point is to find approaches that honor your actual experience rather than forcing yourself to fit into other people's expectations." "How did you get so wise about this?" Yvette asked. Jordan laughed. "Lots of therapy and lots of trial and error. Plus, I've been questioning various aspects of identity for long enough that I've had time to experiment with different approaches and see what works for me. Do you think we could hang out outside of group sometime?" Yvette asked impulsively. "I feel like I learned so much from talking with you, and I'd love to continue these conversations in a more casual setting." "I'd really like that," Jordan said, their expression warming. "Actually, want to come to my art studio this weekend? I'm working on a series about gender fluidity and I'd love to show someone who might understand what I'm trying to express." "I would love that." As Jordan biked away into the November drizzle, Yvette felt a deep satisfaction settling in her chest. For the first time since starting college, she felt like she was building the kind of community she'd always needed but hadn't known how to ask for. People who understood that identity could be fluid and questioning and complex, people who were comfortable with uncertainty, people who valued authenticity over categorical clarity. Back in room 317, she found Alan working on a painting and Sam reading a psychology journal, both absorbed in their respective projects. "How was group?" Sam asked without looking up from their article. "Really good," Yvette said, settling at her desk with her journal. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that questioning doesn't have to be something I graduate from. It can just be how I exist in the world." Alan looked up from his canvas, paintbrush poised mid-stroke. "That sounds like a breakthrough." "Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm still scared of uncertainty, but I'm less scared than I used to be. And I'm starting to think that the community aspect of questioning might be just as important as the individual exploration." "What do you mean?" Sam asked, closing their journal and giving Yvette full attention. "I mean that trying to figure out my identity in isolation was making me anxious and stuck. But exploring questions with other people who are asking similar questions feels generative. Like we're all helping each other find language and frameworks and permission to be complex." "That makes a lot of sense," Sam said. "Identity formation is fundamentally social, even when it feels private." "Plus," Alan added, "you seem happier when you come back from group meetings. More relaxed and more like yourself, if that makes sense." Yvette considered this. "I do feel more like myself there. Like, I don't have to have all the answers or perform certainty about things I'm genuinely uncertain about." That's huge, Sam said. Finding spaces where you can be authentically uncertain is actually really important for psychological well-being. That night, Yvette's journal entry was the most hopeful she'd written since starting college. Tonight I realized that I've been approaching identity exploration like I approach academic problems, as if there's a right answer I can discover if I just work hard enough and gather enough information. But identity isn't a problem to be solved. It's a way of being in the world that can change and evolve and include uncertainty without that meaning I'm doing something wrong. The Maybe group has become my community in a way I didn't expect when I first walked into that room, terrified and convinced I was broken. These people understand that questioning can be its own destination, not just a stop on the way to somewhere else. They've shown me that uncertainty doesn't have to be scary if you're not carrying it alone. I'm also realizing that my friendship with Jordan is teaching me something important about how to exist authentically without apology. They've found a way to be fluid and questioning and complex while still being completely themselves. I want to learn how to do that, to be honest about my own complexity instead of trying to simplify myself for other people's comfort. Most importantly, I'm starting to see that the relationships I'm building, with Maya, with Alex, with Jordan, with the whole group, are valuable in themselves, not just as sources of data about my identity. The connections are the point, not the categories. Tomorrow, ask Maya if she wants to grab coffee and talk about what our connection means to both of us. Not because I've figured out what to call my feelings, but because I care about her and want us to be honest with each other about what we're experiencing. Also tomorrow, text Jordan about visiting their studio this weekend. I want to understand their art, but I also just want to spend time with someone who gets that identity can be beautiful precisely because it's not simple. For the first time since starting college, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, even though I still don't know exactly who I'm supposed to be. Maybe that's the point. Chapter 7, The Paradigm Crack. Maya's hands wrapped around her coffee mug, steam curling between them as she considered Yvette's question. They sat in the corner booth of their favorite coffee shop, the one with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, having what Yvette had planned as the conversation about their connection. So when you say you care about me and want to be closer, Maya said carefully, what does that look like for you? Like, what are you hoping for? Yvette had rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times, but now, looking at Maya's thoughtful expression, all her prepared frameworks felt suddenly irrelevant. I don't know, she said, and for the first time, the admission didn't feel like failure. I know I look forward to seeing you. I know I think about you when we're apart. I know I want to touch your hair and hold your hand and spend entire afternoons just talking with you. But I can't tell you if that's friendship or romance or something else entirely. Maya smiled, and something in Yvette's chest loosened. Can I tell you something? I've been wondering the same things about you. Really? Really? Like, I know I'm attracted to you, but not in the way I've been attracted to other people. It's more gentle, maybe? Less urgent but somehow more important. Maya reached across the table and touched Yvette's hand. I keep thinking about how comfortable I feel with you, and how much I want to take care of you when you're stressed about exams, and how I notice little things like the way you organize your notes or how you get this tiny wrinkle between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. Yvette felt warmth spread up her arm from where Maya's hand touched hers. That sounds like how I feel about you. So maybe we don't need to figure out what to call it before we explore what it feels like. You'd be okay with that? With not knowing what we're doing? Maya squeezed her hand gently. Yvette, I like not knowing what we're doing. It feels more honest than trying to fit into some predetermined relationship script that might not match our actual experience. The words hit Yvette like a small revelation. You like not knowing? I like that we get to figure it out together as we go. I like that we can be affectionate and close and curious about each other without having to justify it with the right labels. Yvette stared at their joined hands, something fundamental shifting in her understanding. I've been so worried about doing this wrong, about not being able to offer you traditional romance or clear attraction categories. But what if traditional romance isn't what either of us actually wants? What if we want whatever this is, this careful, curious, gentle thing that doesn't have a name yet? For the next 2 hours, they talked through their mutual confusion, their shared desire for something deeper than friendship but different from conventional romance, their relief at finding someone else who experienced attraction as a quiet, complex thing rather than a dramatic, overwhelming force. When they finally parted ways, Maya kissed Yvette's cheek, soft and lingering and full of possibility. "I'm really glad you brought this up," Maya said. "I was scared to, because I thought you might want something more definite than I could offer." Walking back to her dorm, Yvette felt lighter than she had in months. Not because she'd figured out what her feelings for Maya meant, but because she'd stopped needing to figure it out before allowing herself to experience them. That evening, she found herself in Jordan's art studio, a converted basement space in one of the older campus buildings, filled with canvases and sculptures and the organized chaos of creative work in progress. "This is incredible," Yvette said, turning slowly to take in the space. "How did you manage to get access to a studio as a sophomore?" Jordan grinned, tucking paint-stained hair behind their ear. "I may have convinced the art department that I needed extra space for my senior thesis project, even though I'm not a senior. But look," they gestured to a series of paintings lining one wall. "This is what I wanted to show you." The paintings were abstract but somehow deeply personal, flowing forms in colors that seemed to shift depending on the light, shapes that suggested bodies without defining them clearly, compositions that felt both grounded and fluid. "They're about gender," Jordan explained, "but also about identity more broadly. About existing in the spaces between definitions." Yvette moved closer to study the brushstrokes, the way colors blended into each other without clear boundaries. "They're beautiful. And they make me feel something I don't have words for." "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Like, sometimes I think we focus so much on finding the right words to describe our experiences that we forget to actually have the experiences." Yvette turned to look at Jordan more fully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent so much time researching gender identity labels and trying to figure out which one fit me perfectly that I almost forgot to pay attention to how I actually felt in my body, how I wanted to move through the world, what kinds of expression felt authentic to me moment by moment." "And when you stopped researching and started paying attention to the actual feelings?" Jordan moved to stand beside a canvas that showed flowing forms in blues and greens. "I realized that the feeling of being between categories was actually more authentic to my experience than any single category could be. Like, the questioning itself was the answer, not a step toward some other answer." Yvette felt something click into place, an understanding that went deeper than intellectual recognition. "You're saying that for some people, uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved, it's actually the most honest way to exist?" "Exactly. And once I stopped trying to solve uncertainty and started embracing it, everything got easier. Including the art." Jordan gestured to the paintings. "These couldn't exist if I insisted on clear definitions and rigid boundaries. They exist because I learned to work with fluidity instead of against it." Yvette sank into a paint-spattered chair, her mind spinning. "I think I've been doing it backwards." "What do you mean?" "I've been so focused on analyzing my feelings that I haven't been present for them. Like, with Maya today, the whole conversation was better because I stopped trying to categorize what we were doing and just did it. Just let myself care about her and tell her so, without needing to know what box that caring belonged in." Jordan sat on a stool across from her, eyes bright with recognition. "Yes. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The experience is what matters, not the category." "But how do you live that way? How do you make decisions or explain yourself to other people or—" Yvette gestured vaguely, "exist in a world that expects clear answers?" "You learn to get comfortable with phrases like, 'I'm still figuring that out,' and, 'it's complicated,' and, 'I don't know yet,'" Jordan said simply. "And you find people who are okay with those answers, or who are asking similar questions themselves." Yvette thought about the maybe group, about Alex's analytical mind that complemented her own, about Maya's gentle curiosity that matched her own uncertain approach to attraction, about her roommates who appreciated her organizational skills without expecting her to organize her identity with the same precision. "I think I've been finding those people without realizing it." "You have. And that's not an accident. Questioning people tend to find each other, because we recognize something familiar in each other's comfort with uncertainty." As Jordan showed her more of their work, sculptures that seemed to change shape depending on the viewing angle, sketches that captured moments of transition and fluidity, Yvette felt her shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't in months. The physical tension she'd been carrying since starting college, the constant anxiety about being behind or confused or wrong, began to release. "Can I tell you something?" she said as they sat on the floor, sharing takeout Thai food Jordan had ordered. "This is the first time in my adult life that I've felt okay about not knowing something important about myself." "How does it feel?" Yvette considered the question, paying attention to her body as much as her thoughts. "Scary. But also, free. Like, I don't have to perform certainty anymore. I can just be curious." "That's huge," Jordan said softly. "Curiosity is so much more interesting than certainty anyway." "Really? Think about it, when you're certain about something, you stop learning about it. But when you're curious, you stay open to new information, new experiences, new ways of understanding. Curiosity keeps you growing." Yvette felt another piece fall into place. "So maybe the goal isn't to stop being curious about my identity. Maybe the goal is to get comfortable being curious indefinitely." "Now you're getting it." That night's maybe group meeting felt different for Yvette than any that had come before. When Dr. Lancaster opened the session by asking how everyone was feeling about their ongoing exploration, Yvette found herself speaking up immediately. "I think I had a breakthrough this week," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Not the kind where I figured out what labels fit me, but the kind where I realized I don't need those labels to live my life authentically." "Can you say more about that?" Dr. Lancaster asked, leaning forward with interest. "I had a conversation with someone I care about, and instead of trying to figure out what my feelings meant before expressing them, I just expressed them. I told her I cared about her and wanted to be closer to her, without knowing if that was romantic or platonic or something else entirely." "How did that feel?" Alex asked. "Terrifying at first. But then incredibly freeing. Like, the conversation we had about what we both wanted was so much more honest and useful than any conversation about labels would have been." Casey looked up from their notebook with obvious interest. "What did you want?" "Like, practically?" "To spend time together. To be affectionate in ways that felt natural. To prioritize each other's company. To care for each other." Yvette paused, realizing something as she spoke. "Those are all things I can offer and ask for without needing to understand exactly what type of attraction I'm experiencing." "That's beautiful," Taylor said. "You're focusing on actions and connections rather than categories." "And," Jordan added with a knowing smile, "you're trusting that the relationship can define itself as you live it, rather than trying to define it before you live it." Dr. Lancaster nodded approvingly. "It sounds like you're describing a shift from trying to solve your identity to being willing to inhabit it." "Yes," Yvette said, the word coming out with more certainty than she'd felt about anything identity-related in months. "I think I've been treating questioning like a temporary state I needed to graduate from, but what if questioning is actually just how I exist in the world? What if being someone who approaches relationships and attraction with curiosity and flexibility is actually a perfectly valid identity in itself? What if it is?" Dr. Lancaster echoed gently. Yvette felt her shoulders drop, tension she'd been carrying for months finally releasing completely. "Then I don't have to fix myself. I just have to understand myself." Alex grinned. "And accept that understanding yourself is an ongoing process, not a one-time achievement." "Right. Like, Maya and I can keep figuring out what our connection looks like as we go. I can keep exploring different types of attraction with curiosity instead of anxiety. I can be someone whose identity includes ongoing questioning." "How does that feel in your body?" Dr. Lancaster asked. Yvette took a moment to check in with herself. "Lighter. Like I've been holding my breath for months and can finally exhale." "That's the feeling of coming home to yourself," Jordan said softly. As the meeting continued, Yvette found herself participating differently than ever before. Instead of taking notes about other people's experiences to analyze later, she was present for the conversation, offering support and insights that came from her own growing comfort with uncertainty rather than her desire to solve everyone's confusion. When Casey shared their fear about never finding a label that fit perfectly, Yvette heard herself saying, "What if the goal isn't to find the perfect label, but to get comfortable with imperfect ones? Or with no labels at all?" When Taylor talked about pressure from friends to just pick a sexuality and stick with it, Yvette offered. Maybe you could tell them that sexuality can be fluid for some people, and that's not indecision. It's just a different way of experiencing attraction. By the time the meeting ended, Yvette realized she'd become someone who could offer wisdom and support to others in their questioning, not because she'd found all the answers, but because she'd found peace with not having them. Walking back to her dorm with Alex, she felt a profound shift in how she inhabited her own life. "You seem different tonight," Alex observed. "More settled, somehow." "I think I am. Like, for the first time since starting college, I'm not anxious about being behind everyone else and figuring out my identity." "What changed?" "I realized that everyone else isn't actually ahead of me. We're all just figuring it out as we go, some of us more quietly than others. And I realized that figuring it out doesn't mean reaching some final destination, it means getting comfortable with the process of ongoing discovery." "That's a huge shift." "Yeah. And the weird thing is, once I stopped pressuring myself to have definitive answers, I started actually enjoying the exploration. Like, spending time with Maya is fun now instead of stressful, because I'm not constantly analyzing what our interactions mean." "And how's that affecting your experience of attraction?" Yvette considered this. "I think I'm finally able to feel what I'm feeling instead of trying to categorize it immediately. Like, with Maya, I can notice that I want to hold her hand without needing to know if that's romantic or platonic hand-holding. I can enjoy the physical affection without pressure to escalate it or define it. That sounds incredibly healthy." "It feels healthy. Like I'm finally living my actual life instead of trying to solve my theoretical life." Back in room 317, Yvette found Sam reading in bed and Alan sketching at his desk, both absorbed in their evening routines. "How was everyone's day?" she asked, settling at her own desk but not immediately reaching for her planner. "Good," Sam said, looking up from their textbook. "I had an interesting discussion in my developmental psychology class about identity formation in emerging adults. Actually, it made me think of your experiences with the Maybe group." "What kind of discussion?" "About how traditional models of identity development assume everyone reaches some stable, integrated sense of self by their early 20s. But newer research suggests that for many people, especially in areas like sexual orientation and gender identity, ongoing exploration and fluidity might be more normative than we originally thought." Yvette felt a warm rush of validation. "Really? Really? Like, the idea that you should figure yourself out by a certain age and then remain consistent might be more of a cultural expectation than a psychological necessity." "That's exactly what I was talking about with Jordan and in group tonight," Yvette said. "This idea that questioning can be a destination instead of just a temporary stop on the way to certainty." Alan looked up from his sketch pad with interest. "You sound like you've had some kind of realization." "I think I have. I think I've been approaching identity exploration like a research project with a definitive endpoint, when actually it's more like ongoing conversation with myself about how I want to show up in the world." "And how do you want to show up?" Sam asked. Yvette thought about this, aware that her answer would have been completely different even a week ago. "Honestly. Curiously. Without apologizing for complexity or uncertainty. Connected to people who appreciate authenticity more than categorical clarity." "That sounds like exactly who you've been becoming," Alan said with obvious warmth. "Yeah. I think it is." In her journal that night, Yvette wrote the most honest entry of her college experience. "Today something fundamental shifted in how I understand identity and exploration. I realized that I've been so focused on analyzing and categorizing my feelings that I haven't been fully present for experiencing them. But when I stopped trying to figure out what my connection with Maya means, and just honored what it feels like, everything became clearer and more authentic." Jordan's art helped me understand that existing between categories can be beautiful instead of problematic. Their paintings live in the spaces between definitions, and they're more honest and compelling because of it, not in spite of it. Maybe my identity can work the same way. Most importantly, I finally understand that questioning doesn't have to be temporary. It can be a way of living, staying curious, remaining open to new information about myself, building relationships based on authentic connection rather than predetermined categories. "For the first time in my life, I'm not anxious about not knowing who I am." I'm excited about continuing to discover who I'm becoming. The paradigm has cracked, and instead of feeling broken, I feel free. Chapter 8, Living in Maybe Land. 3 weeks after her paradigm crack, Yvette found herself doing something that would have terrified her at the beginning of the semester, existing comfortably in uncertainty while living fully in the present moment. She was curled up on Maya's bed, reading for her Victorian literature class while Maya worked on a paper at her desk. Maya's roommate was visiting family for the weekend, so they had the space to themselves, a luxury they'd learned to appreciate. Occasionally one of them would read aloud an interesting passage or make an observation about their work, but mostly they simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. I love this, Maya said suddenly, turning from her laptop to smile at Yvette. Love what? This. Us. How easy it is to just be together without having to perform anything or prove anything. Yvette looked up from her textbook, feeling a warmth settle in her chest that she'd stopped trying to analyze. I love it too. They'd been exploring their connection for nearly a month now, and it had unfolded naturally into something that defied easy categorization. They held hands when it felt natural, cuddled while watching movies, kissed sometimes, soft, affectionate kisses that felt more like expressions of care than passion. They prioritized each other's company, shared their daily experiences and concerns, celebrated each other's successes. Some people might call it dating. Others might see it as an unusually close friendship. Maya and Yvette had stopped worrying about what other people might call it. Are you free for dinner tonight? Maya asked. Jordan mentioned they're cooking for a few people, and they invited us both. That sounds perfect, Yvette said, then paused. Actually, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy with how undefined our relationship is? Like, does it ever bother you that we can't give people a clear answer when they ask what we are to each other? Maya closed her laptop and turned to face Yvette fully. Honestly? I think I'm happier this way than I would be if we tried to fit ourselves into a standard relationship script. What we have feels more authentic to both of us than traditional romance or friendship would. Really? Really? Like, I was in a conventional relationship last year, and I spent so much energy trying to feel and act the way I thought I was supposed to that I lost track of what I actually wanted. With you, I get to just want what I want and express what I'm feeling without worrying about whether it matches expectations. That's exactly how I feel, Yvette said, moving to sit beside Maya on her desk chair. I keep thinking I should be anxious about the ambiguity, but instead I just feel free. Maya leaned against her shoulder. Free to care about each other however much we want, free to be physically affectionate in ways that feel natural, free to let the relationship develop at its own pace. Free to exist in maybe land, Yvette said with a smile. Is that what you're calling it? It's what Jordan calls it. The space between definitions where questioning people get to live. I like that, Maya said. Maybe land sounds like a nice place to live. That evening, they joined Jordan, Alex, Casey, and Taylor for dinner at Jordan's off-campus apartment, a cozy space filled with art supplies, plants, and mismatched furniture that somehow felt more welcoming than any perfectly coordinated room ever could. This is amazing, Yvette said, settling onto the floor with her plate of Jordan's homemade curry. I can't remember the last time I had a home-cooked meal that wasn't from the dining hall. Jordan's an incredible cook, Alex said, already reaching for seconds. One of their many hidden talents. Not that hidden, Jordan laughed, settling into their favorite corner of the couch. I just like feeding people I care about. As the conversation flowed around the room, Taylor sharing updates about their family's reaction to their latest identity exploration, Casey talking about a cute person in their chemistry class, Alex describing their latest engineering project, Yvette realized she was experiencing something she'd never had before, chosen family. These people understood her in ways that felt deeper than friendship but different from romance. They cared about her growth and happiness without trying to direct or control it. They celebrated her successes and supported her through difficulties without expecting her to be anyone other than exactly who she was. Can I tell you guys something? She said during a lull in conversation. Always, Jordan said immediately. I think this is the first time in my life that I've felt like I belong somewhere without having to earn it or prove that I deserve it. You do belong here, Taylor said firmly. You belonged here from your first meeting, when you were still convinced you needed to research your way to self-understanding. But I was such a mess that first night, Yvette protested. We were all messes when we first started questioning, Alex pointed out. That's kind of the point, this is the place where you get to be messy while you figure things out. And you're not even that messy anymore, Casey added. Like, you've learned to be comfortable with uncertainty in a way that I'm still working toward. Maya squeezed Yvette's hand. You've taught me that questioning can be peaceful instead of anxious. That's not nothing. As the evening wound down and people began gathering their things, Jordan pulled Yvette aside. I wanted to thank you for something, Jordan said quietly. For what? For helping me understand my own art better. Like, watching you learn to embrace uncertainty has helped me articulate what I've been trying to express in my paintings. You've shown me that the journey from anxiety to peace with not knowing is something beautiful worth documenting. Really? Really? I've been working on a new series inspired partly by our conversations about living in maybe land. Would you like to see it sometime? I would love that, Yvette said, feeling honored to have contributed to Jordan's creative process. Walking back to campus with Maya, Yvette felt a deep contentment settling in her bones. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it: community that celebrated authenticity over certainty, connection that honored complexity, relationships that grew organically instead of following prescribed patterns. I should probably call my mom tonight, she said as they reached Maya's dorm building. Everything okay? Yeah, I think I'm ready to tell her about where I am with identity stuff. Not because I have answers, but because I don't need answers anymore to talk honestly about my experience. Maya kissed her cheek softly. That sounds like a big step. It feels like the right time. Back in room 317, Yvette found Alan and Sam engaged in their usual evening activities, Alan working on a charcoal sketch, Sam reading a dense psychology text. But when she entered, they both looked up with the kind of immediate attention that meant they'd been waiting for her. How was dinner at Jordan's? Sam asked. Really wonderful. Like, I finally understand what people mean when they talk about chosen family. That's beautiful, Alan said, setting down his charcoal. You sound different when you talk about your maybe group friends. More settled. I feel settled. For the first time since starting college, I'm not constantly anxious about whether I'm doing identity exploration right or falling behind everyone else. What changed? Sam asked with genuine curiosity. Yvette considered the question, aware that her answer encompassed months of growth and learning. I stopped treating identity like a problem to be solved and started treating it like a way of being in the world. And I found people who understand that some ways of being don't fit into neat categories. Like your relationship with Maya? Alan asked gently. Exactly. We care about each other deeply, we're physically affectionate, we prioritize each other's company, but we're not trying to fit it into traditional romance or friendship boxes. It's just ours. That sounds incredibly healthy, Sam said approvingly. You're creating relationship structures that match your actual experiences instead of trying to conform to external expectations. Right. And the weird thing is, once I stopped pressuring myself to define everything, all my connections became more authentic. My friendships, my relationship with Maya, even my relationship with you too. How so? Alan asked. I'm not performing certainty anymore. I can admit when I don't know things, ask for help when I need it, express appreciation without worrying about whether I'm being too intense or not intense enough. You do seem more relaxed, Sam observed. Less like you're constantly monitoring your own performance. Because I'm not. I'm just living. An hour later, Yvette sat at her desk with her phone, gathering courage for a conversation she'd been avoiding for months. Hi, Mom. Sweetie. How wonderful to hear from you. How are classes going? Are you getting enough sleep? How are the roommates working out? Classes are good, I'm sleeping fine, and the roommates are great. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about some personal stuff, if that's okay. There was a brief pause, the kind that meant Linda was shifting into concerned parent mode. Of course, honey. What's on your mind? I've been doing a lot of exploring about identity this semester, romantic orientation, what kind of relationships I want, how I understand myself, and I wanted to share where I am with that. Okay, Linda said carefully. I'm listening. So the thing is, I don't have definitive answers yet. I'm still figuring out how I experience attraction, what kinds of connections feel authentic to me, how I want to navigate relationships. But I wanted you to know that I'm not anxious about that uncertainty anymore. You're not? No. I've learned that questioning can be its own valid way of existing in the world, not just a temporary phase you have to get through. I've found community with other people who are exploring similar questions, and I'm building relationships that feel authentic even though they don't fit standard categories. Linda was quiet for a moment. Can you tell me more about what that looks like? Well, I'm close to someone named Maya. We care about each other a lot and we spend time together and we're affectionate, but we're not trying to define whether it's romance or friendship or something else entirely. It just is what it is, and it's really good. And you're happy with that ambiguity? I'm not just happy with it, I think it's actually more honest than trying to force our connection into a predetermined category that might not fit our actual experience. That's... Linda paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. That's very mature of you, sweetie. I have to admit, I was worried when you first started talking about questioning identity stuff. I thought maybe you were just confused or putting pressure on yourself to be something you weren't. I was putting pressure on myself, Yvette said. But to have answers, not to be something I wasn't. The relief came when I stopped needing those answers to live authentically. And you feel good about where you are? I feel really good. I have wonderful friends who understand me, I'm doing well in school, I'm building connections that feel meaningful and authentic. I'm still figuring out lots of things about myself, but I'm figuring them out from a place of curiosity instead of anxiety. Then I'm happy for you, Linda said, and Yvette could hear the smile in her voice. You sound more like yourself than you have in months. I feel more like myself. And Maya, should I expect to meet her at some point? Yvette grinned. I'd love for you to meet her. And my other close friends from my support group. They're really important to me. I'd love to meet the people who've been taking such good care of my daughter. After they hung up, Yvette sat for a moment in quiet amazement. She'd just had an honest conversation with her mom about identity exploration without apologizing for uncertainty or promising to have clearer answers soon. And her mom had been supportive and curious rather than worried or pushy. How'd that go? Sam asked, looking up from their textbook. Really well, actually. Better than I expected. She was okay with the not having answers thing. She was okay with me being happy while not having answers. I think that's what mattered to her, that I'm not anxious or struggling anymore. Makes sense, Alan said. Parents mostly want their kids to be happy and healthy. The specific details of how you achieve that are less important than the fact that you're achieving it. In her journal that night, Yvette wrote with a sense of profound gratitude, I'm living in maybe land now, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever been. Not because uncertainty is easy or comfortable, but because I've learned to inhabit uncertainty with curiosity instead of anxiety, with community instead of isolation, with authenticity instead of performance. Maya and I are building something together that doesn't have a name but feels more honest than any labeled relationship I could imagine. Jordan, Alex, Casey, Taylor, they've become my chosen family in a way that fills spaces I didn't even know were empty. My actual family is learning to love and support the version of me that includes ongoing questions instead of definitive answers. I'm not the same person who arrived at college with color-coded spreadsheets and identity checklists. I'm someone who can sit with not knowing, who can build connections without categories, who can find home in questioning rather than in answers. Most importantly, I'm learning that maybe isn't a placeholder, it's a destination. And it's exactly where I want to be. The next morning, Yvette woke to find a text from Dr. Lancaster. Would you be interested in co-facilitating a new student orientation session about identity exploration resources? No pressure, but I think you might have valuable perspective to share. Instead of immediately panicking about whether she was qualified or had enough answers to help others, Yvette felt a warm recognition. She did have valuable perspective, not because she'd solved the puzzle of identity, but because she'd learned to live peacefully within the question. She typed back, "I'd be honored to help. When can we talk about it?" For the first time in her life, Yvette Hamilton was excited about a future that included ongoing uncertainty. She was home in maybe land, and maybe land was home in her. Chapter 9, The Choice. Late April in Atlanta meant the campus was alive with dogwood blossoms and the restless energy of students anticipating summer break. Yvette walked across the quad toward the campus wellness center, her steps lighter than they'd been all year. She was meeting Dr. Lancaster to discuss the co-facilitating opportunity, and for the first time since starting college, she felt genuinely excited about taking on a leadership role she wasn't entirely prepared for. The past few months had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and authentic. Her relationship with Maya continued to deepen and evolve without needing definition. Her friendships within the Maybe group had become some of the most meaningful connections of her life. Her academic work remained strong, but no longer consumed her identity. Most importantly, she'd learned to inhabit uncertainty as a permanent resident rather than a temporary visitor. Dr. Lancaster's office was on the third floor of the wellness center, a warm space filled with plants, comfortable seating, and the kind of art that suggested both professionalism and genuine care for human complexity. When Yvette knocked, Dr. Lancaster opened the door with the same welcoming smile that had made her first Maybe group meeting feel safe. "Yvette, thank you for coming. Please, sit wherever you're comfortable." Yvette settled into a chair across from Dr. Lancaster's desk, automatically pulling out her planner, a habit that had evolved from rigid scheduling tool to gentle organizational support. "So," Dr. Lancaster said, settling back in her own chair, "I wanted to talk with you about the co-facilitating opportunity, but first I'm curious about how you're feeling about your identity exploration journey these days." "Really good, actually," Yvette said, surprising herself with how confidently the words came. "I mean, I still don't have definitive answers about my romantic orientation, and my relationship with Maya doesn't fit into standard categories, and I'm still learning about myself all the time. But I'm not anxious about that anymore. I've learned to be comfortable with ongoing questions." "That's wonderful to hear. And what do you think helped you get to that place?" Yvette considered the question, thinking back over the months of exploration and growth. "Community, mostly. Having people who understood that questioning didn't mean I was broken or behind. Learning that uncertainty could be its own valid way of existing instead of just a problem to be solved. Those are exactly the insights that made me think you might be interested in co-facilitating," Dr. Lancaster said. "We're planning to expand our identity exploration programming next year, and I think your perspective, as someone who's learned to embrace the questioning process, could be invaluable for incoming students." Yvette felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "But Dr. Lancaster, I still don't have my identity figured out. I can't tell new students how to determine their sexual orientation or gender identity because I'm still figuring out my own." Dr. Lancaster smiled, and there was something knowing in her expression that reminded Yvette of Jordan's gentle wisdom or Alex's patient insights. "Yvette, can I tell you something? The most effective peer mentors are often the ones who are still actively questioning, not the ones who've reached some final destination." "Really? Really? Think about your own experience. Who has been most helpful to you in your exploration? The people who had all the answers, or the people who were comfortable not knowing and could help you find that same comfort?" Yvette thought about Jordan's art that celebrated fluidity, Alex's analytical approach to uncertain feelings, Casey's nervous energy that reminded her of her earlier self. The people who were comfortable not knowing, she admitted. "Exactly. New students who are questioning their identity don't need someone to give them the right answers. They need someone to show them that questioning itself can be a valid and peaceful way to exist." "But what if I don't know how to help them? What if they ask me questions I can't answer?" "Then you say, 'I don't know either,' and that's okay. You help them find resources, connect with community, learn to sit with uncertainty without panicking. Those are all things you've learned to do beautifully." Yvette felt something shift in her understanding, the same kind of paradigm crack she'd experienced when she realized questioning could be a destination instead of just a waypoint. "You're saying that not having answers might actually be an asset in this role?" "I'm saying that your willingness to be authentic about your ongoing exploration, your ability to find peace with uncertainty, and your understanding that community is essential for identity development, those are exactly the qualities that make someone effective at helping others through similar journeys. Yvette sat quietly for a moment, feeling the weight and possibility of what Dr. Lancaster was offering. What would co-facilitating look like, practically? We'd start with incoming student orientation sessions in August, talking about identity exploration resources available on campus. Then you'd help facilitate maybe group meetings throughout the year, not as the primary facilitator, but as a peer mentor who can share your experience and help create safe space for others. And I wouldn't need to have my own identity completely figured out to do this effectively? Yvette, Dr. Lancaster said gently, identity is never completely figured out. It's an ongoing conversation with ourselves that continues throughout our lives. The goal isn't to stop questioning, it's to get comfortable with the questioning process and build authentic connections along the way. That's exactly what I learned this year, Yvette said, feeling a warm recognition. I spent months trying to research my way to definitive answers, and the breakthrough came when I realized I could live fully and authentically while still exploring who I am. And that's precisely what new students need to hear from someone who's lived it. Yvette looked at her planner, where she'd written, co-facilitating discussion with Dr. Lancaster, in her neat handwriting. 6 months ago, she would have needed to research peer mentoring extensively, create detailed preparation plans, and convince herself she had enough expertise to help anyone with anything. Now she understood that the most valuable thing she could offer wasn't expertise, it was companionship in the questioning process. I'd like to do it, she said, meeting Dr. Lancaster's eyes directly. I'd like to help create the kind of space that was so important for my own growth. Dr. Lancaster's smile was radiant. I'm so glad. I think you're going to be wonderful at this. What happens next? Well, we have the rest of the semester to wrap up, and then I'd like you to spend some time over the summer reflecting on your journey, not to find conclusions, but to remember the moments and insights that were most meaningful to you. That reflection will help you know what to share with others who are just starting their own exploration. Journaling about the process instead of trying to solve the process, Yvette said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Walking back to her dorm that afternoon, Yvette felt a profound sense of rightness about the choice she'd made. She was going to spend the next year helping other students find community and peace in questioning, not because she'd figured out all the answers, but because she'd learned to live beautifully within the questions. That evening, she gathered Maya, Alex, Jordan, Casey, and Taylor for dinner to share her news. That's incredible, Maya said, reaching across the table to squeeze Yvette's hand. You're going to be amazing at helping people feel comfortable with uncertainty. Really? You think so? Are you kidding? Alex said. You've helped me understand my own questioning process better just through our friendship. You bring this analytical framework that makes exploration feel less chaotic, but without pressuring anyone to find definitive answers. Jordan nodded enthusiastically. Plus, you remember what it felt like to be anxious about not knowing things. That empathy is going to be so valuable for new students who are in that same place. What if I mess it up? Yvette asked. What if I say the wrong thing or give bad advice? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time, Taylor said pragmatically. Just like all of us are doing with everything else in our lives. Casey looked up from their pasta with obvious excitement. Can I just say how much I would have loved to meet someone like you when I first started questioning? Someone who was honest about still figuring things out but wasn't panicked about it? You think that would have been helpful? I think it would have changed everything. Like, I spent so much time thinking I was broken because I didn't have clear answers yet. If I'd met someone who was comfortable with ongoing questions, I might have relaxed into the process instead of fighting it. As the conversation continued, Yvette realized that her friends were describing qualities she'd developed without fully recognizing them. Over the past year, she had learned to be comfortable with uncertainty, to build community around questioning, to support others in their exploration without needing to fix their confusion. I think I'm ready for this, she said, more to herself than to the group. We know you are, Jordan said with obvious warmth. And we'll be here to support you through it. That night, Yvette began what would become her summer journaling project, not seeking conclusions about her identity, but reflecting on the journey of learning to live authentically within uncertainty. Entry 1, The Beginning. 8 months ago, I arrived at college with detailed plans for figuring out my sexual orientation, as if identity were a research project I could complete through sufficient effort and organization. I was terrified of being behind everyone else, of not knowing things I thought I should know by age 18. Tonight I agreed to co-facilitate identity exploration sessions for new students, not because I've figured out all the answers, but because I've learned to be comfortable with the questions. The journey from anxiety to peace with not knowing has been the most important learning of my life so far. Not because uncertainty is easy, but because I've discovered that uncertainty can be inhabited with curiosity instead of panic, with community instead of isolation, with authenticity instead of performance. I want to help other students find what I found, not the right labels or definitive answers, but the peace and freedom that comes with learning to live fully while still exploring who you are. Over the following weeks, as final exams approached and the semester wound down, Yvette found herself observing her own experience with new attention. She noticed how comfortable she'd become with Maya's affectionate hand on her shoulder in the dining hall, not because she'd figured out what their relationship was, but because she'd stopped needing to know. She observed her easy participation in maybe group discussions, offering support and insights not as an expert but as a fellow traveler in questioning. Most importantly, she watched herself navigate the end of freshman year without the anxiety that had characterized her arrival. Instead of worrying about what she'd accomplished or failed to figure out, she felt grateful for the community she'd built and excited about continuing to grow within it. I think this year turned out completely different from what I expected, she told Sam and Alan during one of their last evening conversations in room 317. Different how? Sam asked. I came here thinking the goal was to figure out who I am and then be that person consistently. But I learned that identity is more like an ongoing conversation with yourself. It keeps evolving and deepening, and that's not a bug, it's a feature. And now you get to help other people discover that same thing, Alan said with obvious pride. Yeah. And I'm actually excited about it instead of terrified, because I'm not trying to be someone who has all the answers. I'm just trying to be someone who can help others get comfortable with the questions. The last maybe group meeting of the semester was bittersweet. Several members would be graduating or transferring, and everyone was preparing for summer separation from the community that had become so central to their growth. I want to go around the circle one more time, Dr. Lancaster said as the meeting wound down, and have everyone share one thing they learned this year that they want to remember. When it was Yvette's turn, she found herself thinking about the scared, overwhelmed freshman who had first walked into this room 8 months ago. I learned that questioning isn't something you graduate from, she said. It's a way of living that keeps you curious and open and authentic. And I learned that the best communities are built around shared questions, not shared answers. After the meeting, Dr. Lancaster pulled her aside. Are you feeling ready for the summer reflection project? I think so. I'm actually looking forward to it. Not because I'm trying to solve anything, but because I want to remember all the small moments that helped me learn to be comfortable with not knowing. That's exactly the right approach, Dr. Lancaster said. And Yvette? I want you to know how proud I am of the growth you've shown this year. You've become someone who can hold space for uncertainty with genuine peace, and that's a rare and valuable gift. Walking back to her dorm for one of the last times as a college freshman, Yvette felt a deep satisfaction settling in her chest. She'd made the choice to spend the next year helping others find what she'd found, not answers, but community, not certainty, but comfort with complexity, not solutions, but companionship in the questioning process. For the first time in her life, she was excited about a future that explicitly included ongoing uncertainty. She'd chosen to serve others not from a place of having figured things out, but from a place of having learned to live beautifully within the figuring out process. Maybe land, as Jordan called it, was turning out to be not just a place to visit, but a place to make home, and now it was a place she could help others discover for themselves. Chapter 10, The Return. September in Atlanta arrived with the familiar energy of new beginnings, students hauling suitcases across campus, long lines at the bookstore, the nervous excitement that marked the start of another academic year. Yvette Hamilton walked through it all with a sense of profound recognition and gentle amazement at how different everything felt exactly 1 year later. She was returning to campus as a sophomore, but more importantly, she was returning as someone who had learned to be comfortable with uncertainty. Her summer had been spent journaling about the small moments that had shaped her freshman year journey, not seeking conclusions, but remembering the experiences that had taught her to find peace in questioning. The reflection had been exactly what Dr. Lancaster had suggested, a way of honoring the process rather than trying to solve it. Now, on a Tuesday evening in early September, she stood outside room 204 in the campus wellness center, holding the key Dr. Lancaster had given her that afternoon. In a few minutes, she would co-facilitate her first Maybe group meeting, welcoming a new group of students who were beginning their own explorations of identity and belonging. Her hands shook slightly as she unlocked the door, not from anxiety about having the right answers, but from the magnitude of being trusted to help create safe space for others questioning. It was nervous energy, but purposeful nervous energy, completely different from the panicked uncertainty that had characterized her freshman year arrival. Inside room 204, Yvette began setting up chairs in the familiar circle that had become synonymous with acceptance and community in her mind. Each chair she positioned reminded her of someone who had sat there during her own freshman year journey: Jordan in their usual spot near the window, Alex fidgeting with their rings, Casey taking careful notes, Taylor offering hard-won wisdom, Dr. Lancaster facilitating with gentle questions that opened space rather than demanding answers. She moved to the whiteboard and wrote in her neat handwriting, "Maybe group, welcome." Her hand trembled slightly on the exclamation point, and for a moment she was transported back to exactly 1 year ago, when she'd stood in this same room for the first time, terrified and convinced she was broken because she couldn't figure out her own identity. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Lancaster asked, entering the room with her characteristic warm smile and an armload of handouts. "Nervous," Yvette admitted, "but excited nervous. I remember so clearly what it felt like to walk into this room for the first time, not knowing if I belonged here or if I'd ever figure anything out. And now I get to help other people feel welcome in that same uncertainty." "That's exactly the right energy," Dr. Lancaster said, beginning to arrange resource materials on a side table. "Your authenticity about your own experience is going to be the most valuable thing you bring to this role. What if they ask me questions I can't answer? What if they want me to tell them how to figure out their identity?" Dr. Lancaster paused in her setup to look at Yvette directly. "What would you have needed to hear when you first came to this group?" Yvette thought about her freshman self, anxious, overprepared, convinced that not knowing meant failing. "I would have needed to hear that questioning was okay. That I didn't have to have answers before I was allowed to explore. That other people were confused too, and that confusion didn't mean I was broken." "Then that's what you'll tell them." Students began trickling in around 6:55 p.m., and Yvette felt her heart clench with recognition and protective tenderness. A freshman with nervous energy kept checking their phone and adjusting their backpack straps. A transfer student chose the seat closest to the door, clearly ready to flee if necessary. Someone introduced themselves to Dr. Lancaster with 3 different names because they were trying them all out to see what fits. By 7 o'clock, 8 students had gathered in the circle, some sitting forward with eager attention, others slouched back with carefully casual indifference that didn't quite hide their anxiety. "Good evening, everyone," Dr. Lancaster began with the same warmth that had made Yvette feel safe from her very first meeting. "Welcome to Maybe Group. This is a space for students who are exploring questions about sexual orientation, romantic attraction, gender identity, or any other aspect of personal identity. The only requirement for being here is curiosity about yourself. No labels required, no timelines expected, no pressure to have anything figured out." She gestured toward Yvette with obvious pride. "I'm Dr. Lancaster, and this is Yvette, who will be co-facilitating with me this year." Yvette was a member of this group last year and has offered to share her experience and perspective with new members. Yvette took a breath, looking around the circle at faces that reminded her so much of her own freshman uncertainty. "Hi everyone. I want to start by telling you something that someone told me in this exact room a year ago, when I was sitting right there." She pointed to the chair where the most nervous-looking freshman was currently perched, feeling like I was broken because everyone else seemed to have figured out their identity except me. She made eye contact with that student, seeing her own former anxiety reflected back. "You don't need to know anything yet. You don't need to have figured out your sexuality, or your gender, or your romantic orientation, or whether you even want those labels at all. The fact that you're questioning, that you're uncertain, that you're here asking maybe? That's exactly why you belong here." A sophomore with paint-stained fingers raised their hand tentatively. "But, what if I never figure it out? What if I'm always just, maybe? Yvette felt a warm rush of recognition, not just of the question, but of the opportunity to offer the wisdom she'd received when she'd asked the identical thing. She grinned, the same grin Dr. Lancaster had given her when her own panic about permanent uncertainty had felt overwhelming. Then you'll be in really good company. Some of the happiest, most authentic people I know live permanently in maybe land. It's actually a pretty great place to be. You're always open to new discoveries about yourself. Really? Asked a freshman who looked to be about 17 and was fidgeting with the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Really? I spent most of last year thinking that questioning was just a temporary phase I needed to get through to reach some final destination of knowing who I am. But what I learned is that questioning can be the destination. It can be a way of living that keeps you curious and open and authentic. Dr. Lancaster leaned forward slightly. Yvette, can you tell us what that looks like practically? How do you live with ongoing questions? Well, Yvette said, settling more comfortably in her chair, I have relationships that don't fit neat categories, but they're some of the most meaningful connections of my life. I've stopped pressuring myself to use specific labels, and instead I focus on what feels authentic and honest about my experiences. I've learned that the people who matter will care more about your authenticity than your ability to categorize yourself perfectly. A transfer student who'd been sitting quietly near the door spoke up. But how do you explain yourself to family or friends who want clear answers? That's a great question, Yvette said. I've gotten comfortable with phrases like, I'm still figuring that out, and, it's complicated, and I'm exploring different aspects of my identity. And you know what? Most people who care about you will respect that honesty more than they would false certainty. What about dating? Asked another student. How do you navigate relationships when you don't know what you're looking for? Yvette thought about Maya, about their gentle exploration of connection without predetermined categories, about the peace they'd found in letting their relationship define itself organically. You can be honest about what you're experiencing and what you're curious about, without needing to have it all figured out first. You can tell someone I'm interested in getting to know you better, without knowing exactly what form that connection might take. The conversation continued for another hour, with students sharing their own fears, questions, and experiences. Yvette found herself moving naturally between listening and offering perspective, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had learned to be comfortable with the questions. When the most nervous freshmen shared their terror about being permanently confused, Yvette offered, confusion isn't a permanent state, it's information. It's your mind telling you that you're in a growth phase, learning new things about yourself. When the transfer student worried about being behind their peers in identity development, Yvette said, identity development doesn't follow a timeline. Everyone's journey is different, and comparing your process to other people's will only make you miserable. When the paint-stained sophomore asked about finding community, Yvette gestured around the room with genuine warmth. You're finding it right now. This group, and others like it, and the individual friendships you'll build with people who understand that identity can be complex and fluid. As the meeting wound down, Dr. Lancaster opened space for final thoughts or questions. I just want to say, said the hoodie-wearing freshman, this is the first time I've been in a space where not knowing felt okay. Like, I've been so stressed about figuring myself out, but hearing that questioning can be valid in itself, that's really helpful. That's exactly what this space is for, Yvette said softly. Learning that uncertainty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, it means you're growing. After the new students left, many exchanging contact information and making plans to grab coffee, Yvette helped Dr. Lancaster clean up the room. How was that for you? Dr. Lancaster asked as they stacked chairs. Amazing, Yvette said, and meant it completely. Like, I remember sitting in this circle feeling so alone in my confusion, and tonight I got to help other people feel less alone in theirs. I don't know, it feels like coming full circle, but in the best possible way. You were wonderful with them. You have exactly the right combination of empathy for where they are and perspective on the journey they're beginning. I kept seeing myself in them, Yvette admitted. The nervous energy, the fear of being behind everyone else, the assumption that not knowing meant failing. But also the courage it takes to show up and be vulnerable about uncertainty. And what do you think you offered them that was different from what you needed when you first came here? Yvette considered this as she erased the whiteboard. Permission to be uncertain indefinitely, maybe? Like, when I first came to group, I was looking for help figuring things out quickly. But what I needed, and what I think they need, is permission to take as long as they need, to change their minds, to live authentically while still exploring. That's a beautiful gift to give. Walking back to her dorm that evening, Yvette felt the deep satisfaction of having found her purpose, not in having all the answers, but in helping others get comfortable with the questions. She thought about the nervous freshman who reminded her so much of her earlier self, about the transfer student who was learning that identity development doesn't follow a schedule, about the paint-stained sophomore who was already finding their artistic voice in uncertainty. This was what she'd been meant to do, she realized. Not solve the puzzle of identity for herself and others, but help create spaces where people could explore that puzzle without shame or pressure. Help build community around shared questions rather than shared answers. Back in her residence hall, she found Maya studying in the common room, surrounded by books but clearly waiting for her return. "How was your first co-facilitating session?" Maya asked immediately, closing her textbook and giving Yvette her full attention. "Really wonderful," Yvette said, settling beside her on the couch. "Scary and wonderful and exactly what I was meant to be doing. Tell me everything." As Yvette recounted the evening, the nervous students, the familiar questions, the opportunity to offer the same wisdom and welcome she'd received, she felt Maya's warm attention and genuine interest in her growth. "I'm so proud of you," Maya said when she finished. "You've become someone who can help others find peace in uncertainty." "That's incredible." "It feels incredible," Yvette agreed. "Like, a year ago I was terrified of not knowing who I was. Tonight I got to help other people see that not knowing can be a perfectly valid way to exist." "And we still don't have our relationship figured out," Maya said with a smile, "but that's exactly what makes it authentic to who we are." "Exactly. We're living proof that you can build meaningful connections without needing to categorize them perfectly first." That night, Yvette's journal entry was filled with gratitude and recognition. "Tonight I facilitated my first maybe group meeting, and it was like watching my own journey come full circle. I saw myself in every nervous student who walked through that door, the fear of being behind, the assumption that uncertainty meant failure, the desperate wish for someone to just tell them the right answers. But instead of giving them answers, I got to give them what was most valuable from my own experience: permission to not know, community in the questioning, and the understanding that exploration itself can be a destination." The scared freshmen who kept checking their phone reminded me so much of my first meeting, terrified but brave enough to show up anyway. The transfer student worrying about being behind everyone else could have been me 8 months ago. The sophomore asking about permanent maybiness was asking the exact question that changed everything for me when Dr. Lancaster helped me see that maybe could be a way of living, not just a temporary state. I don't have my identity figured out any more than I did when I started college. But I've learned to inhabit uncertainty with peace instead of panic, with community instead of isolation, with authenticity instead of performance. And now I get to help others find that same peace. This is what I was meant to do, not because I solved the puzzle of who I am, but because I learned to love the process of ongoing discovery. I get to spend this year helping other people find home in maybe land, just like Jordan and Alex and Dr. Lancaster helped me find it. I'm exactly where I belong. Chapter 11, The Change. As the second maybe group meeting of the new semester wound down, Yvette watched the familiar dance of students exchanging phone numbers, making coffee plans, and tentatively beginning the friendships that would sustain them through their questioning journeys. The protective tenderness she felt toward these new members reminded her of how Dr. Lancaster had looked at her own freshman group, with deep care for people who were brave enough to show up in their uncertainty. Most of the students filtered out in small clusters, their conversations continuing into the hallway, but one person lingered. Casey Wong sat hunched in their chair, fidgeting with the oversized sleeves of their hoodie, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to begin. "Casey?" Yvette said gently, settling back into her own chair. "Did you want to talk about anything from tonight's discussion?" Casey looked up with wide, anxious eyes that Yvette recognized immediately. It was the same expression she'd worn during her first few group meetings, intelligent and curious but overwhelmed by the magnitude of not knowing fundamental things about herself. Casey started, then stopped, then started again. "I'm sorry, I know you probably need to go, and I don't want to keep you, but I keep thinking about what you said about living permanently in maybe land, and I... Casey, Yvette interrupted softly, you're not keeping me. I have time. What's on your mind? Casey's shoulders relaxed slightly, though they continued fidgeting with their sleeves. I keep waiting to wake up one day and suddenly know if I'm bi or pan or ace or what. Like everyone else got some manual I missed. And I know you said questioning can be permanent, but what if I'm just broken? What if I'm the only person who can't figure this stuff out? Yvette felt her heart clench with recognition. She could have been listening to a recording of her own freshman fears, the same desperate wish for a clear manual, the same terror of being permanently broken. Can I tell you something? Yvette said, gesturing to the chair directly across from her, the same configuration where she'd had this exact conversation with Dr. Lancaster 8 months ago. What if I told you that the manual is a myth? That most of us are just making it up as we go, and that's not just okay, it's beautiful? Really? Casey's voice was barely above a whisper. Really? Like, I spent most of my freshman year convinced that everyone else had received some instruction booklet about identity that I'd somehow missed. I researched obsessively, trying to find the right framework that would tell me exactly what I was feeling and what it meant. Did you find it? No. And that turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. Casey looked confused. How is not finding answers the best thing? Because I learned that the process of questioning, the curiosity, the exploration, the willingness to not know, that process is valuable in itself. It's kept me open to connections and experiences I would have missed if I'd locked myself into categories too early. But how do you make decisions? How do you date people or explain yourself to your family if you don't know what you are? Yvette smiled, remembering asking these exact same questions. You make decisions based on what feels authentic in the moment. You date people you're curious about, regardless of what category that curiosity fits into. You tell your family you're still figuring things out, and most people who love you will respect that honesty. That sounds terrifying. It was terrifying at first, Yvette agreed. But it's also incredibly freeing. Like, I have this relationship with someone named Maya that doesn't fit into romance or friendship categories, but it's one of the most meaningful connections of my life. I have friends who understand that my way of experiencing attraction is quieter and more complex than cultural scripts suggest, but that doesn't make it less real. Casey leaned forward slightly. And you're happy without having definitive answers? I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because uncertainty is easy, but because I've learned to inhabit uncertainty with curiosity instead of panic, with community instead of isolation. Community? You're in it right now, Yvette said, gesturing around the empty room that had held so much exploration and acceptance. This group, and the individual friendships you'll build with people who understand that identity can be complex. You're not alone in not knowing, Casey. You're in really good company. For the first time since the meeting had started, Casey smiled, tentative, but genuine. Thank you. Like, I know we just met, but somehow you saying that makes me feel less broken, I guess. You're not broken, Yvette said firmly. You're exactly where you need to be, asking exactly the right questions. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave the building, Casey asked one more question. Do you think I'll ever feel as comfortable with not knowing as you do? I think you'll find your own way of being comfortable with whatever your authentic experience turns out to be, Yvette said. And it might look different from mine, but that doesn't make it less valid. They parted ways outside the campus wellness center, Casey heading toward the freshman dorms and Yvette walking back to her residence hall through the heart of campus. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the quad was dotted with study groups and students hanging out on blankets, talking and laughing with the easy confidence of people who seem to have everything figured out. 8 months ago, walking past these groups would have filled Yvette with envy and anxiety. She would have looked at their apparent certainty and felt her own confusion more acutely. Tonight, she felt profound gratitude instead of envy. She got to live in the questions, to help others find comfort in uncertainty, to build community around the shared experience of not knowing. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Casey from group tonight. Thank you for making me feel like maybe is enough. Yvette stopped walking, a warm recognition flooding through her. She typed back without hesitation, "Maybe is everything." As she continued across campus, Yvette thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared freshman who had arrived with color-coded spreadsheets and identity checklists felt like someone she had known in another lifetime. That girl had been so afraid of uncertainty, so convinced that not knowing meant failing. Now she understood that uncertainty had been her doorway, not her obstacle. Every moment of confusion had been information, every question had been an invitation to grow, every instance of not knowing had been an opportunity to remain open to new possibilities. She passed the library where she'd first studied with Maya, not knowing then that their connection would evolve into something beautiful precisely because it refused categorization. She walked by the dining hall where she'd had countless conversations with Alex about the complexity of attraction, learning that analysis and experience could complement each other without one having to dominate. She could see the arts building where Jordan had shown her that identity could be as fluid and beautiful as their paintings, existing in the spaces between definitions. Most importantly, she could see the campus wellness center behind her, where Dr. Lancaster had created space for questioning to be welcomed rather than solved, where a community of uncertain people had learned to find certainty in their shared uncertainty. Her residence hall came into view, warm lights spilling from windows where students were probably doing homework, video chatting with family, having the kinds of late-night conversations that marked the beginning of lifelong friendships. Maya would be in the common area, waiting to hear about tonight's group meeting with the genuine interest that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. As Yvette looked up at her dorm building, then back at the campus around her, she felt completely at home in her own beautifully uncertain skin. She was ready to spend another year, and maybe many years beyond that, helping others find the same peace she discovered in the space between labels. The girl who had arrived at college needing to have everything figured out was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the questions themselves were home, that community could be built around shared uncertainty, that authenticity mattered more than categorical clarity. Yvette Hamilton had learned to live in Maybe Land, and Maybe Land had become the most beautiful place she'd ever been. Upstairs in her room, she found Maya curled up on her bed with a textbook, but she set it aside immediately when Yvette entered. "How was tonight's group?" Maya asked, making space for Yvette to sit beside her. "Really good. There's this freshman, Casey, who reminds me so much of how I was when I first started coming to group. Anxious about not having answers, convinced they were broken for not knowing things about themselves. And you were able to help them?" "I think so. I got to tell them what Dr. Lancaster told me, that questioning can be its own destination, not just a temporary stop. That uncertainty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong." Maya smiled, reaching for Yvette's hand in the casual, affectionate gesture that had become natural between them. "I love watching you in this role. You've become someone who can offer others exactly what you needed when you were struggling." "It feels like the most important work I could be doing," Yvette said. "Not because I've figured out all the answers, but because I've learned that the answers aren't actually the point." "What is the point?" "Connection. Community. The courage to keep exploring who you are while building authentic relationships with people who appreciate your complexity." "Like us," Maya said softly. "Like us." That night, Yvette's final journal entry of the story was filled with deep satisfaction and anticipation. "Tonight I had a conversation with Casey that could have been a conversation with my freshman self. They asked all the same questions I asked, felt all the same fears I felt, wanted the same magical manual that would tell them exactly who they are. But instead of trying to give them answers, I got to give them what was most valuable from my own journey: permission to not know, community in the questioning, and the understanding that maybe isn't a placeholder, it's a way of living. I've learned to be at home in uncertainty, to build relationships that don't fit standard categories, to find purpose in helping others navigate the same beautiful confusion I've learned to love. I'm not the same person who arrived at college desperate to check, figure out identity, off her to-do list. I'm someone who understands that identity isn't a problem to be solved but a conversation to be continued. Someone who's learned that the most meaningful connections often exist in the spaces between labels. Someone who's discovered that community can be built around shared questions rather than shared answers. A year ago, I was terrified of maybe. Now maybe is my home, and I get to help others find their way here too. Maybe is everything. Outside her window, the campus settled into its nighttime quiet, full of students beginning their own journeys of discovery. Somewhere out there, Casey was probably lying in their dorm bed, thinking about permission to not know. Somewhere, other freshmen were asking themselves the same questions Yvette had asked, beginning the same journey from anxiety to acceptance. And tomorrow, Yvette would be there to help them find their way to maybe land, not because she had all the answers, but because she'd learned that the questions themselves were home. She was exactly where she belonged, beautifully and permanently uncertain, ready for whatever discoveries lay ahead.